The man says he is just an inhabitant of planet Earth, a civilized place. He spits blood and a child calls out to old man Siu, saying that her mother asked her to bring this for him. The old man thanks her. The child places the small bread roll on the floor and asks him to get better and make more of that soap. With that, the little girl leaves in the blizzard. And once again, he says, I am an inhabitant of planet Earth, someone who came from a civilized world 50 years ago. He doesn't know how, but he ended up in this weird world. He was on his way to a lecture with his coworkers when they were swept away by a landslide. It seemed obvious that everyone had died, but they woke up in this strange world. In front of a giant fox with 3 tails and a 2-headed snake. Strange people with the power to fly through the skies. That reminded him of some of the novels he read from time to time. However, even though he was aware of this, he never imagined that all of his colleagues would have a much better life than the one he led. Creatures known as the sages appeared from the skies and were impressed by the talents his friends had, and each of them was taken to different parts of the world and the heavens. In that place, only he and director Kim were left. For some reason, they both held out hope that since they had also come from another world, something special would eventually happen to them. However, as time began to pass, they realized, he and director Kim, that there was nothing special about them. All they could do was manual labor to survive. 6 months later, the director said he couldn't go on living that way. Putting together the little money they earned, he bought a basic martial arts book, the kind that's sold on any street. Strangely, however, in just 3 months, he mastered the book and became a martial arts master. He started to work for the nation and learned more and more advanced martial arts. Before long, he became a powerful warrior known throughout the world, while the protagonist was left behind. To this day, he still wonders, was there something special in store for him? He always believed so, but time passed and nothing happened. And now, after 50 years, he's just an old man who is going to die alone from a cold. He tried his best to survive. He learned the language of this place, how to write, how to earn money. He bought a small plot of land and built his own house. Using his knowledge from Earth, he made things like soap, for example, to sell and make money. This world was much less civilized, and he knew of some concepts that were new there. But the martial world here is competitive. His recipe was quickly stolen, and the guys with much more money invested in a much larger scale production, and he was sort of pushed out of the market. Only in other novels do you invent soap and become a billionaire. Since then, it hasn't been easy to make even enough money to get by. And now there he was, waiting for death after being rejected by this world. He wonders what they expected him to do. He tried his best. So what was the right path? Why was he chosen if he wasn't special? And why did he have to keep on living just to have everything taken from him? At that moment, he no longer even had the energy to keep his eyes open, while thinking that all he wanted was a little more power or perhaps opportunities. And just like that man, he died. However, we can't end everything here. There he is, waking up, looking at his own hand, wondering why he's alive and why he's wearing the same clothes he had on when he arrived from Earth. In front of him are all the people who work with him, nursing headaches, wondering where they are. And that's when it hit him. He had come to this world with the power, yes indeed, the power of regression. Right after that, one of the guys there, who I think is that Kim guy, comments that they were on a trip. So how did they end up there? Obviously, this is the very first day they arrived, right after the accident. Strangely, when they hit the ground, he saw a strange light and opened his eyes there. The problem is this was 50 years ago. It's hard for him to really remember how things worked. Someone is calling for manager Seo, and while our boy is there wondering what he should do now that he has regressed. In most regression stories, the person abuses their knowledge of the future. However, all he learned was how to make soap, and he doesn't even remember the past because he ended up living for too long. At this, the guy was calling for him shouts, calling for Siu Yun Ryam, and tells him to look over and stop ignoring everyone. Our boy is about to apologize for not turning around, and the guy just punches him in the face out of nowhere. The girls there and the others just stand there with their mouths open, confused. The guy who called him said he's an idiot, that he must have fallen asleep while driving and made everyone fall into that hole. Apparently, the guy has no idea that they actually died, since he says almost everyone died. My friend, let me tell you a little secret. Rian, however, had forgotten. It had been a long time, since anyone had even called him manager. That's why he didn't realize this guy was referring to him. And the guy asks if manager Siu is trying to lose his job the moment they get back. The protagonist recognizes the guy as Section Chief Jun Myong-hoon, the son of a butterfly. A scumbag who only got the position because he's the son of some director or something like that. 32 years living in pure nepotism and a bastard who always made his life difficult. The guy is there chewing him out while everyone's asking him to calm down. Siu starts to get up, remembering that on the day he was driving, he really was a bit tired. That's because the bastard John had dumped all of his own work on our boy to handle. Not to mention he wasn't even supposed to be the one driving on this trip. The guys are screaming, everyone trying to calm him down, while Siu's memories are slowly returning. On that day, in the past, something similar happened. He thought he was in the wrong, and just kept apologizing, all hunched over. And that's how he went on living for the next 50 years, always apologizing, lowering his head. Even when bandits robbed him, he would apologize. When the martial artist humiliated him, he apologized. However, after years and years of a life like that, he began to realize something. It's necessary to control your behavior around people you can't handle. However, there are different situations. At this, he calls out to Chief John and says that he knows he's angry, but now wasn't the time to be pointing fingers at each other. That John guy comes over to throw another punch with a lovely comment about his mother. Whoa, and it landed square on his cheek. I thought our boy was going to defend himself. Ah, hold on, he's giving him that stare down, saying that he'll never have to kneel before someone he can actually handle, and he serves one right back to his cheek. Everyone stood with their mouths agape as he moved forward, saying that in his past life he had been beaten by countless martial artists, an uncountable number of times. He lands another direct hit and he remembers. The bandits were much more aggressive and he would get beaten up even for just gathering herbs on the mountain. The same thing would happen when he didn't pay his taxes. And now there he is, beating the hell out of the guy. In this violent world, he had managed to gain something that these people at this moment did not have. He knew exactly how the human mind worked. The moment you land a punch right in the eye, fear is amplified. After taking a few more, only 2 words instinctively leave the mouth. Right then, John, trembling all over, just utters the famous line, "I'm sorry." The protagonist might not have the mythical talents that those sages from the heavens seek, or the martial prowess necessary to become famous in this world. However, he did have the ability to change his destiny. That fool John is there with his hands on his head completely subdued, while the others call out to CEO and ask him to calm down a bit, How could he beat up his coworker like that? Our boy immediately plays the normal person card, saying that he accidentally lost his head and offers a sort of apology. Manager Kim says that there's no point in apologizing to them. That John guy might have crossed a line, but he went too far by pummeling the guy like that. CEO knows that of all the people there, the only one who will sort of stick with him is Director Kim, so he kind of agrees with the guy. This man is going to become one of the strongest martial artists as soon as he starts learning. So he has to support this guy and stay close to him. Obviously, this was all just his plan for now. He goes over to John and apologizes, saying that he really did overreact. John looks like he wants to say something, but one little glare from him and the guy turns away, crapping his pants. Kim takes a look at the forest there, and says they have to get out of this place and find a village or something of the sort. Seo knows that's the logical thing to do. However, it's a shame that logic doesn't work in this world. This was the world of immortals where everyone is trying to secure their own immortality, and the only rule that exists in this place is that the strong devour the weak. Anyone in this world with a sword in hand will fight for fame and honor. The name of this forest is the Path of Ascension. Unfortunately, there is no nation, village, or anything nearby. At this, he calls out to Kim and says that the sun will be setting soon, so maybe they should make a camp in a safe place. The man agrees, saying he's right, but wants to know, where's their car that was full of supplies? If they could find that, they could survive easily. Our boy already knows it's a shame, but that car will not be found under any circumstances. The problem is they won't believe him if he just says that. He can try to convince these guys that it's impossible to find the car. He has another plan. He says that the best idea for now is to split up. One team looks for the car while the other team sets up camp. That way they secure both opportunities. Since it's a logical decision, everyone ends up agreeing and night falls. Obviously, they didn't find it and they built a campfire. The blue-eyed girl, whose name I still don't know, wants to know where the car is. They were in a landslide, so where did the thing end up? Kim and everyone else comments that nobody has a clue. She's asking the wrong person. Everyone there is lost. The group is eating some kind of chestnuts, which are pretty tasty, and C says he found more on the way, so they don't need to worry. At this, the manager praises him, saying that the situation is very difficult, but thanks to him, things aren't getting too complicated. Ever since the company, he knew he was a person they could count on. And now he remembers that he was probably very tired since John had dumped all his work on the boy. The other girl with the yellow eyes says that the manager has indeed always been very diligent. The little devils are all laying on the parades, right? It's a shame he already knows these wretches are all going to abandon him. In his past life, Seo only found this cave after hours and hours of walking in the dead of night. And now he says that it was by luck that he found this place, while thinking that he has to take advantage of this short moment because this is the last night they'll be able to laugh like this. A short time later, under the moonlight, he's trembling as he says he welcomes the Lord of the Forest. A three-tailed fox in front of him says that the boy has a very strange smell for a human, has lived for over 1,000 years and has never smelled anything like it. At this, the people who are waking up in the cave come outside and they all get a fright too. In his memory, Seo tells everyone to kneel and respect the Lord of the Forest. At this, the fox says that every time it meets a human, it remembers why they are idiotic and rude. It would have already torn off everyone's limbs, but it seems one of them knew how to respect the forest, and that's why they would be forgiven. However, with that said, they were in the territory of the Lord of the Forest and would have to pay the price, so one of them would have to offer an arm to stay there. Seo remembers in his past life, no one knew what to do when this creature appeared, and they started screaming in desperation. The fox then took all of everyone's limbs. Damn man, they were left half dead. At least this time, the fox seemed to be appreciating the way he acted. The creature, however, licking its lips, wants to know who's going to give an arm. Seo had already seen everyone lose all their limbs in his past life, so this wasn't such a big deal. A single arm from one person was a small price. Besides, those guys would arrive suddenly and heal everyone. That's how they survived. Not to mention, knowing that something like this could happen, he had even prepared an herb that helps reduce the pain. And at this, with sheer guts, he says he'll offer his arm. Everyone is startled and the fox doesn't hesitate for a second. It just goes and takes a big bite, man, and pulls the boy's arm off. Everyone there feels the pain, and he immediately goes to get the herb. While he eats, the fox then says it thought the taste would be different because of the smell, but he was really identical to any other human. In fact, it was even worse because he seemed to have very impure veins. Siu, completely wrecked, apologizes for the offering not being good enough. But at this, the fox turns and says it would let them stay for 7 days in its territory, and no one there would die, thanks to its divinity in this forest. It leaps away and is gone. The rest of the group come calling for Siu, asking if he's okay. He says he is and asks for help to get to the cave. Since he was the first one to encounter the fox, he says he talked with it before they arrived and learned a little about this world. He reveals that they are no longer on Earth, and at this, everyone is scared, saying they never imagined something like this had happened. But considering they saw a 3-tailed fox, so reality is sinking in for the guys. And our boy explains, showing his arm, that at least they're safe for a week because of what he did. The others want to know, what happens after that week, and he says they'll have to give up something else. Everyone is desperate, but he just says he's exhausted and needs to rest and hopes everyone understands. Night falls, and apparently Jung said something because everyone is against him. The protagonist is listening to the guy asking who's going to give up an arm and a leg in a week. The guy in the Adidas tracksuit says that even so, they can't just give up on Siu like that. He was very useful and was the person who found the place, right? And he even gave up his arm. Jung says they should make the most of his presence, and then discard him. He's already lost an arm anyway and won't last long. For now, Jung is making his little plans, but our boy is over there without an arm and farming aura with his hand in his pocket. And from what he heard the guys talking about, it seems they want to imprison him to offer up one of his limbs every week. He picks up a big-ass rock, saying he wasn't too thrilled about that. However, with the violence he learned over the last 50 years, it would be easy to finish off Jung, even without an arm. The guy is there with his back turned, talking while he questions whether to kill him or not. He takes a deep breath, drops the rock, and says not for now. Fear must be influencing everyone's judgment at this moment, and if he's too cruel, it will only complicate the future relationships he needs to build with Director Kim. At this, he hears someone telling Jung to shut up or they'll break his legs. Sia realizes that even though Jung is full of plans, there were still people on his side. Night falls and another day arrives. Unlike the fox that ate an arm, the two-headed snake that appeared only asked for a little blood. This same snake in the past life sucked their blood, even though the poor souls had no limbs left, no feet, no arms. This time, that Chief Ogai offers his little arm for a suck, and the snake took a quick taste and left. That's because the human's blood this time was the worst it had ever tasted. It didn't want any more. Siu knows it didn't like it because that guy's blood is bathed in alcohol and nicotine, on top of the boy's cholesterol. At this, he tells John Mingyong to come with him to get some herbs. It's kind of disrespectful to have called the guy by his full name, but Siu just asks if he's hungry or not. The guy says yes, so he tells him to come on because he's going to show him which herbs are edible. He's already planning to give his arm to the fox next week too, so if he dies, he needs someone like him to know these things. John is all awkward there, right? This is exactly his plan, and he says it's good to know that and thanks him for sharing the information. However, Siu knows very well, man, the fox isn't coming back and this guy won't even have a chance to make use of this information. Next scene, he's chewing out the fool John, asking how many times he has to tell him not to pick the wrong herb. The guy's all like, I'm sorry. And our boy says it seems like he's trying to kill everyone. He keeps chewing the guy out, taking advantage of the passive aggression from his past life. John tries to explain that he needs a break. He's been digging for these herbs non-stop. However, Siu knows that this bastard did everything he could to punish him from the very first day he was at the company. And with that, he just tells him to get back to work, that they have to finish this before the sun sets. A while later, John manages to find a giant ginseng in his hand. He asks if this thing is really normal, and our boy says it seems so. Obviously, the guys have no idea that this is actually a yellow bamboo root. Maybe it's because they're in the Forest of Ascension that they are so full of energy. Normally, that thing grows to the size of a little finger. However, in a place like this, things are different. It's not very useful for those who depend on spiritual energy, but for those who rely on physical strength, it's perfect. Seeing that the harvest is going well, John gets excited and already wants to know how much more they'll find. A while later, looking at the horizon, Siu knew the time was coming. A bright explosion happened in the sky. John fell face first to the ground. Everyone is writhing with their hands on their heads. What's going on? Some guys appear in the sky, saying it's a surprise but found so many talented people. The one in the background in a yellow robe tells Byulko to disappear because they belong to him. The guys are all arguing there while Kim wants to know who they are, what's going on. But one in the black robe comments that only 3 of them had spiritual roots and the rest seemed like normal mortals. He extends his hand, making a golden ball, and throws an attack at Jun. The old man appears excited, saying that the boy really did have the power of the golden thunder. The one who looks like a woman with black lipstick, who I don't know if it's a he or a she, says it's his turn now and plays a little tune. Right then, the blue-eyed girl starts to writhe in agony, screaming desperately, while the other one celebrates, saying she found a perfect immoral root. The muscular guy puts his hand on the shoulder of that Chief Ogai and says he has a sacred body. He'll be taken as a disciple of Azura. The guy is clearly kind of scared, not knowing how to respond while feeling the pressure from the man. But the one with the black lipstick says that maybe he'd be better off in the Valley of Ghosts, a perfect place to seek immortality and dominate the heavens. They all seem to be arguing over who gets to keep Chief O, while Kim is kind of confused by everything that's happening. Suddenly, the guy in the golden robe pulls out a small pot and sucks John inside, saying that humans are too indecisive and he will take him to the path of ascension regardless. The muscular man sees that our boy lost his arm to the fox and says that he really is very brave. He might just be a regular mortal, but he really was quite a boy. Siu thanks him, but at this, the guys are already leaving, saying their work there is done. They should take advantage of the fact that this forest would be safe for 10 years since they passed through. Kim, desperate, tries to say that they need help because they don't even know how to get out of this place, but the guys have already left. Siva knows in his past life, he shouted and shouted but was ignored like an insect, so it's not even worth it. At least just as everyone's bodies were restored in the past life, in this one he got his arm back. Kim, however, wants to know what they are going to do to survive in a forest like this. Strangely, a bunch of stars seems to be heading in a certain direction, and he wonders why. The next day, inside the cave, the girl is suffering, spitting blood. The other one there in the green clothes, I already realized that these girls must not be important, because I still don't know their names. She comments that her friend there in the pink clothes is not doing well. What do we do? Siva just asks to wait a little longer. What if someone shows up to heal her, right? It would be a huge coincidence. The group finds it a bit strange, but right then, someone enters the cave and says that them suffering in this place were like ants trying to defeat a dragon. Kim asks who he is, and the man introduces himself as the Sea Dragon King Si-Huil Nice Sing, first name as our Make Good Idea author. He comments something about controlling the storm and says he saw it was raining here, and that's why he came to this place. The girl lying on the ground somehow used some kind of magic to create this. He finds it strange because she looks like a normal woman, so how could she have so much power? Besides, she wasn't even consciously manipulating the weather, which was even stranger. Seo says that they are the ones who are confused. They arrived in this place not long ago, and powerful people like him keep showing up all the time, because it seems like they are taking his companions. The so-called Huil laughs and says that apparently some colleagues had already arrived there and seen potential in the group. It's almost ironic that now, conveniently, he has also appeared in front of this woman. He then asks if the mortal understands where he is. This was a place known as the Path of Ascension, the perfect passage point to the upper world, and in a few months, the Gate of Ascension would open there. It's something that happens once every 1,000 years. And because of that, countless creatures and people gather in this place to try to pass through this door. And that's why so many strange people are showing up in this place. Seo says he understands, while Kim wants to know why the rest of his colleagues were taken into these sect-like things. Will says that it's really difficult for a mortal like him to understand. For people in this world, it was common to possess magic to increase or decrease the size of things. And probably the guys who took his friends have their entire sect and group inside one of these objects. Their plan is to cross the gate carrying everyone. He himself inside this object as the Sea Dragon's castle stored away. There, more than 8,800 dragons were sleeping. Now, I don't know if he means dragons as in the creatures or dragon members, right? Because he says there that the girl is very peculiar. If she joined the group, she would have the chance to become something extraordinary. Kim asks him to wait, saying he can't just take the girl like that. But suddenly, he just falls to his knees and his eyes are almost popping out of his head. Will just says he will give his blood to her and accept her as part of the group. This was the best solution for everyone there. Furthermore, he will advise them to never get in the way of the intentions of the people in this world. Damn, the boy's head is about to explode and our poor protagonist got caught in the crossfire. Will leaves, saying he is being merciful. Most people would have killed him. With a big thunderclap, he flew off on the dragon, stylish as hell. The next day, everyone was kidnapped. Oh no, only this one is left. We still don't know her name, man. She's laughing like a maniac, saying, what a mess. This world with its dragon business, colleagues being taken away, people flying, what the hell is this? This would probably be my exact same reaction as Siu gently pats her, telling her to calm down. She, however, just begs for our boy not to be taken away too. She wouldn't be able to survive in this forest alone. However, he just thinks it's a shame, but their time is up. Suddenly, she begins to writhe in agony, puts her hands on her head, and says something is coming. Kim runs to help, but she says it's too late, and whatever it is has arrived. Out of nowhere, an old man on a mechanical Oni lion appears. Good heavens, man, that one came straight out of ChatGPT. And the old guy wants to know how there are mortals on this path. However, he comes to his own conclusion, saying that the place is unstable because of the opening of the gate. That must be how they ended up here. Now he wants to know from the mortals who emitted that vast consciousness. He felt a strong presence, as if it were one of the sages from the upper realms descending to Earth. And for some reason, he believes it's the girl. The old guy asks the other man to stay there, wanting to know who he is, and warns him that she is their colleague. However, the old man just gives him one look, and once again, Director Kim is attacked. Oh, the poor guy, man. Every person who shows up beats him up, my boy. It's a good thing our boy cushioned the blow so the guy wouldn't die, but geez, his ribs got torn up, and the not all peculiar old man went over, took the girl's face in his hands, and said the child will be taken with him. She might not have a good foundation, but with the talent she possessed for consciousness, he can awaken her power. She's crying, calling out for the two of them, but the guy says it's best for her to abandon these connections with the world, especially now that he has already made this offer. At this, the two are flying, and apparently he's going to kill them to force her to accept. She, however, says she accepts if he doesn't kill them. Better that way. The old man says it's good for her to forget all the connections she has with the world, and she says that's fine. He lets the two of them go, but then suddenly aims in their direction, saying that if he leaves them alive, she will remain connected forever. Ah, phew. He opened a portal there for them to return to a nearby city. Humble, right? The other guys who came didn't even do that much for the boys. Well, it's true they didn't have much of a choice either, because in reality, they were just sucked into that thing. And through the strange old man's little ring, they could only hear the girl calling for them. But goodbye. The two of them wake up in the middle of an abandoned place, hearing people selling scriptures, selling cloth in a place called Yangak. See opens his eyes there in the alley, wondering where exactly he is. In his past life, he didn't fall into this place, so unfortunately, he doesn't know it. Apparently, that old man told the truth. He threw them into a random place. However, for some reason, he still felt as if it were a little familiar. Shielding his eyes from the sun, he finally recognizes the place where he had once lived for a while. The famous capital of Manga, the city of Sukyam. From what I've understood so far, our boy has no powers at all, except for the fact that he can regress. So it's the competition of the talented against the boy who goes back in time. A short time later, they're still in the alley talking, and the old guy says he can't take it anymore. He's going crazy. Sue comments that he feels the same way and wish he could wake up as if it were all a dream. The poor old guy scratches his little hair and says that now they're screwed, only the two of them are left. At least maybe they should be relieved, right? That they weren't taken by those monsters. Stu, however, doesn't think the same way. He may have gone back to the past, but he remembers that following this path, he was nothing more than an herb collector who got beaten up every day. He then says that whatever the future holds, they can't just stand still in this alley forever, so at least they have to get out of there. The city is vast, but Kim doesn't understand anything these guys are saying. It seems like everyone is commenting about them, since they're kind of being stared at, but he has no idea what about. At this, Siu says they're commenting that the clothes they're wearing are funny. Everyone around is speaking Chinese, but the two of them are Korean. So the guy is a bit confused, but Siu says he learned Chinese when he was younger. The old man, however, seeing the boy's torn up back, is more worried about that than the fact that he speaks two languages. And the bastard lied, it's not even Chinese they're speaking. The symbols are kind of similar, but the sounds are completely different. In his past life, he spent 2 months being chewed out by beggars just to start understanding what these guys were saying. However, now there's no reason to worry about that. He says that first it's time to get new clothes, but the guy is already unsure. How are they going to manage if they have no money and can't even communicate properly? However, the clever devil went to an herb shop and threw that fat ginseng into the old man's hand, who was shocked. He immediately let him know that this yellow bamboo root was over 800 years old, so he better pay a good price for it. The old guy immediately offers 15 silver ingots, that's some serious bars, and seems like a hell of a lot. Even Siu is surprised. It seems that in his past life, he never managed to accumulate so much money. I thought he was going to try to negotiate to show he knows the values, right? But the bastard was a really broke beggar man. He just accepts. A short time later, they're already in a big-ass house that our boy seems to have rented or bought, and he already tells Mr. Kim that he's going to teach him the language of this place. It seems everything worked out well and quite easily. However, that right there is the power of money. The problem is that to get this house, plus fake identities for both of them and clothes, he spent almost everything. He's left with one little silver ingot, and the director can't help but notice that the boy's back is still bloody. Good heavens, go take care of that. It's going to get infected, and you'll have to reincarnate again. At this, Kim says he's going to stop calling our boy manager, and that from now on, he'll be Su Yun. A little later, he explains that the reason they got all this money was because of those herbs. The problem is, they're going to run out of money when the herbs run out. So the first and most important thing is to find a way to earn money consistently. Mr. Kim already thinks they can sell the rest, save up some money, and start a business. Siu knows that this guy used to manage a relatively large company, so it's not a bad strategy. It'll allow them to live. But just living is no longer enough for him. He went back in time, and in this life, he's going to dream big. He knows that besides that, Mr. Kim is a martial genius. By reading some cheap, random street books, he managed to become a master in a few months. A short time later, he got some more advanced techniques and became one of the greatest masters in this world. But what if this guy learned the advanced techniques right from the start? Maybe he could anticipate the birth of the most powerful swordsman this world has ever seen by at least 30 years. And obviously, with that, he will benefit to the maximum while he is close to him. At this, he calls for the director and comments that in this world, he seems to be realizing that this thing called martial arts is very relevant. Considering that, probably if they start any kind of business and have any success, they will need to know how to defend themselves. Director Kim says he's heard of that stuff before, but as far as he knows, martial arts are only taught to those who belong to a sect. So how are they going to learn? Our boy already notices that the man knows a little about the martial world. He's not completely lost. He explains that in this city, there are 7 famous sects. There are the Demon Slayers, the Blinding Sect. No way am I going to say the names of all 7. We'll never remember them. but it looks like I'm going to have to because the Demon Slayer sect uses sword and blade techniques. There's the Buddhist temple, that fights kind of with those Karate Kid moves. There's the House sect, which are the smart ones, and the sect of the Seven Mysteries. It seems 3 of these are demonic sects, and not much is known about them, other than the fact that they have proficiency with witchcraft. And obviously, they do a lot of illegal things. He asks which of these Kim seems to like the most. Gul replies that he likes, obviously, the Demon Slayer sect. A true master in a place like this has to use his sword and learn blade techniques. Kim is impressed. He didn't even need to convince this guy to follow the exact same path he took in his other life. Kim wants to know, however, how does he already know all this? Our boy says that when he was negotiating and getting the identities, he overheard some guys talking. And man, our first time skip happened. 3 months. In front of the sect, the guys ask what they're doing there. Our dear Seo there on the left and says he brought his older brother, who is interested in learning martial arts. The Rock in a Goku outfit doesn't seem very excited about it. However, he sees from their clothes that the guys must have a good amount of money and they're in need of it. Even so, he apologizes and says that learning martial arts at this age would be almost impossible. Our dear Seo insists, asking to at least see someone from the higher ranks, already slipping him a coin. A while later, already inside the sect, someone wants to know if they really just want to learn for self-defense. Our boy brought a feast of silver ingots and says yes, that's all they want. The moment the old guy sees the money, he says it's all right, they can be external disciples. However, they should know that there's no special treatment there for those who enter through donations. Besides, they would only accept one of the 2. Kim is about to complain about this, but right then our boy accepts, saying it's perfect for them. The guy is already leaving, saying, okay then, just come find him there and join the rest of the disciples. Kim asks our boy if it's okay for only him to be learning martial arts. He would have chosen a different group if he had known it would be this expensive. Our boy tells him not to worry, he was never very good at sports either. While he's going to handle the business for now, Kim will go there and learn a bit of those so-called martial arts. The old guy thanks him but says he doesn't know if he'll really be able to learn much. Our boy tells him to trust himself and try before judging. Another time skip. 7 months later, the competition within the sect. The man on the throne wants to know where this guy came from. Obvious, it's Mr. Kim who has crushed all the disciples who have been in this sect for years. Mastering a martial art means understanding its true meaning and aligning your body with it. Someone with low knowledge at best becomes a third-rate warrior. And to advance from that point on, you need more and more knowledge. The guys attack him, saying he's an outsider and will never beat them. Obviously, more knowledge means you've invested more time and also put in more effort. However, certain people had enough talent to laugh in the face of all this knowledge business. They had enough talent to advance through numerous stages at once. The Demon Slayer sect is already famous for having numerous members like that. But for the first time, an outsider appeared and killed all of those so-called great disciples. In just 7 months, Director Kim became a first-rate warrior who had mastered absolutely all the techniques of that place. The old guy bites himself. He doesn't understand how it's possible for someone to evolve so quickly. To force something like that, they would need to gather countless martial artists to support someone. Not to mention that this guy is an outsider who has never had any contact with martial arts. So how did this happen? It was as if the very tradition of that place had meal before this man. Whoa, and they gave the order to capture him. There's our boy. He already imagined that this could create a problem, an outsider dominating this place in 7 months, leaving everything in chaos. Because of this, the guys are accusing him of being a spy, but even imprisoned, the Slay Dog is practicing. What Seo doesn't understand is why he's also imprisoned. He knows nothing about martial arts, and now he's in there with the other guy. Our boy asks if the director isn't worried, man. A lot of people suspect he's a spy. Normally, in these kinds of stories, they'll destroy his martial arts, cut off an arm, or somehow prevent him from being able to fight. The director, however, replies that he already knows about that. But for some reason, he feels that continuing to practice is the only way to get past the next barrier. And inside, he already knew that upon passing this one, he would advance to the next stage. Seo knows how incredible that was. Being a first-class warrior was already impressive, but advancing beyond that is something only the masters of the sects can achieve. This was already a level where at most there are 1,000 men with this strength in this world. Not to mention that, after this, the only thing left is the peak, where you are basically untouchable. Right then, Seo is certain this guy is going to be at the top of the world, not 30 years earlier than he imagined, but about 40 years faster. 7 days later, there's manager Kim with little flowers flying around him, absorbing energy as Seo already knows that this is the key that only appears in martial artists nearing the peak. At this, Kim stands up, announcing that he has crossed the barrier and now he's no longer afraid of this sect's leader. Our boy praises him, says his talent exceeds what he expected. The old guy says he's also impressed with himself. He didn't imagine he had this kind of talent. Maybe it was because when he was a child, he read countless martial stories. Right at that moment, some guys rush in, announcing that the time has come. They had received orders from the leader to destroy his energy core. That's because they are now certain he's a damned member of the demonic sect. Kim gives them a look and our boy, tries to calm everyone down, saying he already confessed that no one there is a spy. The guy just tells him to shut up and punches him in the face, warning that he's already heard them talking in that coded language and is sure they are not honest people. However, at this, Kim has already drawn his sword and slash, his hand is cut. The cut was so precise that he didn't sever the hand, but he disarmed the guy. And the bald guy warns that he's already made it clear this was his first sect. The Rock Goku comes to slash with his sword, but in a few seconds, everyone had received the same little tap on the hand and dropped their swords. Everyone is already running desperately down the corridors, saying that strangely he seemed to be at the peak of martial arts. At this, Kim calls for our boy and warns that he's going to other sects to train and wants to know what he's going to do. Our boy, not being a fool, says he's going to follow him. They could go, for example, to the unorthodox dragon sect. The old guy says he'll meet him there, and in the next scene, he's already at the top of the mountain. And damn, Kim's sword is already bathed in blood. He asks why it took Siu so long, and he laughs, saying that yeah, the director is a little faster than him. And noticing the state of the sword, he already knows that this guy was not a violent person at all, but this world has already changed him. It would be a dream if one day he could return to the peaceful life on Earth. If he could choose a return, it would be there. He's tired of the violence of this world. However, none of that matters, because now he's here and he'll do whatever is necessary to survive. After being betrayed by the first sect, they invaded the dragon's house and took over everything. 2 years later, they ventured into the Wanga region and continued to defeat numerous sects. And it was in the 3rd year that all the emblems of all the sects had been cut down by him. Before long in that region, he was named the strongest martial artist under the heavens, and he used this fame of his to unite the sects and form an alliance. Man, 7 years later, we're moving along here, huh? He and the director were as close as brothers, ignoring the age difference between them. They even managed to work on a specific martial art for our boy. Mr. Kim hands him the book and says the name of the technique is the Mountain Cutter. He had made this with our boy's talent in mind and is sure he can reach the peak. Siu seems impressed that technique was really above any other he had ever seen. The only problem is obviously the expected one. He had absolutely no talent. He was learning from the most powerful martial artist under the heavens, who created a martial art specifically for him and only him. And even so, he barely managed to become a third-rate warrior after a whole year of practicing. At this, he says that maybe there's no way. He has a talent for medicine, and apparently, that's the way to live life. Each person has talents in different areas. And with that, on the first day after a decade had passed, he glimpsed the level he had only heard about in legends. The 5 energies of the world converting into a single person. The old guy has a fit and starts contorting. What's this? His hair grew long and turned black. Siwa calls for the old guy, and suddenly the guy is handsome with long hair and muscular. This was the so-called skeletal reconstruction that creates a new body. Next chapter, our boy says that the guy, is looking younger than him, and Kim responds that he really does feel full of life, as if he could do anything. Our boy congratulates him, saying the world is going to be scared of this skeletal reconstruction. At this, Kim stands up and says he'll have to pass on the succession of the martial alliance to someone else soon. Our boy wants to know who he's thinking of, and the guy says that there are some talented people, but no one really understood the essence of martial arts. Seo comments, that he's the only one extraordinary enough to know what that really is. If he's expecting to find another genius like himself, it's going to be difficult. Kim, however, looking out the window, said that even when trying to lower his expectations, there was no one who was worthy. And we've jumped forward another 15 years. It's been 35 years since our boy began his life on the path of ascension, and now he's already 65 years old man. He's curious to know what Kim is doing. A year after the skeletal reconstruction, he passed on the position of leader to someone else and left. He wanted to be able to retire with that guy, but he had to stay in this place to take care of the strategic part of the alliance. Kim said he'd like to travel through this world much more. Maybe that's why he couldn't come to our boy's retirement ceremony. He's walking through the garden saying that this place is too silent and quiet. He bought this beautiful mansion with the money he got from his retirement. The only downside is that it was too big, and he was all alone. At this, there's someone there in the middle of the bushes, and when he takes a look, it was Kim. I'm still not used to him with long hair. Our boy wants to know where he's been and why he's only showing up now. However, he just falls back onto the grass and calls out for Seo, and he tells him that he really believed he was blessed in martial arts. Our boy says that of course he was. If he's not a genius, who would be? His friend replies that yes, in this world of common mortals, he really was not ordinary. The protagonist laughs, of course he wasn't ordinary. However, Kim then says that he fought against a true practitioner, one of those from 35 years ago, like that guy who flew and took their friends. Siva knows that these guys don't reveal themselves easily. They are like shadows that control the entire world from the darkness. And as the martial alliance they created gained more and more power, these guys started wanting to influence them. No one could stop these guys because opposing them was like opposing the nation itself. And that's why any rule given by them was obeyed. That's why Kim left this place. He wanted to fight against these guys as an individual and not as a master, especially since that could affect the alliance. Kim then says that they were extremely difficult to find, but he located one. Most ignored him, saying he wasn't worthy of a fight for being immortal. They all disappeared, used illusions, and none of them wanted to fight. However, 5 years ago, he finally got a duel. Siu asked if he won, and the guy says he won. The protagonist praises for not being the leader and doing this, otherwise they would have paid the price. Kim then says that he put his whole life on the line in the fight against this guy, and all he managed to do was a small cut on the tip of his finger. The truth is, the guy made a bet that if he made even the slightest cut, he would theoretically win, so that's kind of how he was considered the winner. Steel right then says this guy must have been one of the top 10 strongest, something like that. However, unfortunately, that wasn't the case, man. He was actually at the stage of one of the weakest. In comparison to mortal martial artists, this guy was basically like someone who just entered the second stage, extremely basic. Siu says that's impossible. He already knew that in his past life, these guys were ridiculously powerful creatures. However, he's sure that Kim is someone who has reached the pinnacle of humanity. He could deliver numerous cuts while seeming to float and was untouchable. This guy in front of him was a genius, so how did he only manage to cut the tip of a random cultivator's finger? And at this, Kim tells him that he has lived his whole life as a frog in a well. They don't stand a chance against these guys who are basically walking natural disasters. However, he has something to say. Even so, today he cut off one of their hands. Our excited boy asked if he managed to win, and he says no. The guy put a talisman on his hand, regenerated, and that was it. The problem is that now he realized he has reached the limit of martial arts, and today he's here to say goodbye to our boy. That's because when the guy saw his willpower and his training, he said he would accept him into the sect. He would no longer be a martial artist, but would instead begin the path of immortality. Seo says that's impossible. To become a cultivator means to abandon mortality. However, something like that can only be done if the person possesses a spiritual root. And Kim then explains that his skeletal transformation is basically him reaching the same level of talent that a cultivator is born with. Someone as brilliant as him needed to train his whole life to reach the minimum that these guys possess. He makes a cut in the void and says he's leaving. The crazy guy is literally entering another planet, saying he's going to leave one last gift for our boy. Before he can respond, he's left with the scroll and the guy has disappeared. The manuscript was a record of how to transcend and achieve cultivation through martial arts. Stu, however, wanted to know where his friend was going without him. And with that, time passed. Once again, there he is coughing, saying that this world is cruel. It's been 50 years since he arrived in this world. However, there he is again, dying from a random cold, just like in his past life. Destiny was something that it seemed a human, no matter how much they tried, could not escape. In the end, the only thing that changed was the house and the clothes, but he died on the exact same day. At this, he is sure he lived life to the fullest. He didn't want to have any regrets like in his past life, so he kept himself as busy as possible, studied as much as possible, practiced as much as possible, and never even bothered with marriage or normal things. It was because of this that he managed to unite all the martial sects in the region. He achieved fame, wealth, and everything the mortal world had to offer. So why now at this moment did he have a feeling of emptiness? Could it be that if he and Kim had tried even harder, they would have reached the heavens? Unfortunately, his body will not find that answer. All he could feel was a deep sense of powerlessness. Truly, it was another life of disappointments. This marked the end of the second regression and the arrival of the Leica. And you remember that the last chapter ended at the moment he died in the second regression. However, it's not surprising he woke up in the same forest, the path of ascension, and his body was full of energy. In other words, his regression wasn't just a one-life thing. At that moment, that bastard with brown hair shows up and slaps him again, calling him a son of a... However, this time, Siu easily dodges. The guy is trying to hit something no matter what, but Siu is just wondering, why did I regress? I have a new body, I'm full of energy. Clearly, a new opportunity should be something good. But what happened to the things I built over the last 50 years? Ma Yonghan keeps cursing, saying he's a bastard who almost killed everyone and still has the nerve to dodge like that. However, Siu just keeps staring, wondering if this was really something good. And soon he says no. In fact, this power he received was more of a curse, one that denied him the meaning of life. Of course, some regressions would be wonderful, and he would be grateful for that opportunity, but what if he gets stuck in this forever? He would be trapped in the wheel of fate, forced to suffer until the end of time. Not to mention that he no longer knows anyone from the people he met in his past life. That's because in front of him now are completely different beings who, no matter how much they share the same appearance, are not the same as before. Even Yang Hun, whom he considered his own brother. That guy no longer exists in this world because the Yang Hun who was his friend went through countless experiences that shaped him. With that, he tells Jin to calm down and asks what getting angry like that will help. The dude is saying he's a shameless son of a... However, Siu just reveals that it was Ma Yonghan who should have been driving. But the protagonist was forced to drive even after having a bad night's sleep, since that damn Ma Yonghan also dumped a bunch of work on him. Besides, who could dodge an avalanche on a narrow street? It would be good for him to stop pointing fingers and start thinking about what they can do. The fool is there exhausted and panting, unable to argue anything. And in that, the protagonist calls for the director and says he will look for a place for them to stay before the sun sets. Everyone was supposed to go look for the car or a way out of the forest. When it starts to get dark, he will light the campfire and everyone should head in that direction. Night falls and the protagonist wonders if it's worth connecting with these people in some way. As always, he will be alone in the end. Already in the cave, the campfire has been lit and everyone is sleeping on the ground. Siu is now afraid of this so-called eternal regression. In any case, the only thing that could give meaning to his life would be for this ability to be removed. Maybe he would disappear if he returned to Earth, realizing how he always comes back to this moment before the path of ascension. But how is he going to get to Earth? He remembers the old man with the monocle saying that when the path of ascension opens, the surrounding space destabilizes, and they, being ordinary humans, might have gotten trapped in this so-called spatial variation. At that moment, the protagonist imagines that this opening of the Ascension Gate must have something to do with the fact that they were thrown into this world. Maybe there's a way to use this to make him return. The problem is, at first he had to get stronger, since as an ordinary human, he couldn't achieve anything and force something to happen. He needed to become as powerful as Yang Huan became in his past life. With a longer lifespan and able to experience more things, maybe he could research how to access this so-called path. The goal has now become clearer. He had to get stronger to access this path of ascension. The next morning, he's eating that same root from before to strengthen himself. However, now that he knows how to use energy from plants, he can concentrate in his core, something that would have been impossible in his past life. He starts practicing the Dragon Vein technique, which was the technique Yang Huan did for him, and with that, he begins to break the energy blockages in his body. The only downside is that his body is still full of stress and jump from his past life and the foods from Earth. After a while, he is kind of sanding one of the woods and seems to be making a spear. He starts practicing the cuts and realizes that he's worse than before. This is because at the end of his life, he stopped practicing since he was old, and now his skills are poor. However, a glance at the tree, a whip with the wood, and he makes a cut. Even though his skills were mediocre, growing the Mao would just be a matter of time, as he remembers a lot. However, Manager Kim sees this right away and wants to know how he did something like that. How did he make a cut with a twig and slice a tree? Sue gives a curious look while thinking that the guy who will help him become powerful has finally arrived. He then asks if Director Kim wants to learn. The damn bald man finds nothing suspicious and just says yes. But buddy, you just came from Earth. You should find it strange that this kid is tearing apart a tree. However, the scene shifts to the same old thing. The fox approaches, saying that humans are disgusting and are bold to be in her forest. Siu has lived so long that he even forgot this damn thing would show up. In his first and second lives, all he could do was tape the bite, blood gushing, and the fox taking his arm. He blocked some points just to lose less blood and feel less pain, but there was nothing he could do. The people ask where he is going, but the protagonist walks calmly towards the fox, knowing that in this third regression he was also weak. The truth is that in his second life, he swore he would reach the level of convergence of the 5 energies. However, even after hundreds of years training with the most powerful martial artists, he barely managed to reach the first level. The truth is that his martial talent is irrelevant compared to the people around. Wow, he tears off his own arm, helping everyone, and says that no matter how he is, no matter how weak he is, and that it would take a millennium or 10,000 years, he would not give up. The fox licks her lips and says he is interesting, a human who knows his place and knows how to sacrifice himself. Since it was like this, she would try what he is offering. Siu stares, thinking he will keep giving this arm until eventually the day comes when he will be stronger than her. As always, after eating the arm, the fox left them there. Without caring about the rest of the team, he continued practicing in the forest. The only moment he stopped training was when the zero gravity came and took his friends. As soon as they left, he went back to practicing without eating or resting. He only finally stopped on the 4th day, where he presents himself as an inferior mortal and says he wanted to ask something to the sea dragon. The so-called Huil, who is the horned one, wants to know why he is curious. Siu then says that the girl he is taking had her spiritual root trapped, meaning she wouldn't be able to practice. Not to mention that being a mere mortal, she would live for at most 100 years. So why was he taking her? The horned one replies that he is informed too much for a mortal, but he doesn't have to worry. When she accepts his blood, she will awaken a spiritual root and receive talents. At that moment, Siu gets excited and asks if he could also receive an opportunity like that. They were all from the same lands, and maybe they have some special power he might be interested in. Huil, however, just smiles and tells him to listen. At that moment, Siu feels some pain in his chest, and the guy says it's good for him to know this to stay alive. He should never demand or ask for anything from someone like him. He has lived countless millennia and understands things he has no idea about. However, he was lucky that he is one of the kindest. Any other at his level would be more than willing to kill simply for making eye contact. With that, the guy disappears in the thunder and leaves surfing on the dragon. Meanwhile, poor Kim is there, not understanding anything that happened. The next day, the other friend would be taken. The protagonist asked a similar question. Kim Yum didn't have a spiritual root, so why could she become a disciple of the old man? The old man shows a pill and says this item allowed anyone to reach their spiritual instincts. Even a mere mortal could have the opportunity to become powerful if they consumed this item. This was all great information for Siu, because now he knew there was a path beyond simple practice to become more powerful. And in this, the old man tells that it is possible for a mortal to train in martial arts and gain the root of the 5 elements. However, this was a long path and the result was quite mediocre. The truth is that what you gained with the pill was much better and much faster. This opens the portal for him and says that it's enough. He has nothing to resolve with either of them, and they were to disappear. The work friend shouts for both of them, but the protagonist opens his eyes atop a tree. From afar, he can see the southern side of the Yango region. Just like in his past life, it seems he and Kin would spend some time navigating this region. However, our protagonist challenged countless people from all over this world, so he knows most of the paths like the back of his hand. With that, he woke the director and took him to the nearest city. He explained the whole situation, and obviously, the guy was confused. But little by little, he began to accept reality. Soon after, they arrived in the city of Robiuk, where they sold those ascension herbs but only bought a small house. The protagonist taught Kim the language of that world, the mountain destruction technique he created in his second regression, modifying an older technique. All this to better suit Kim's own abilities. However, after practicing just a little, Sue was already thinking about how demotivating this was. Kim reached the level of 3 flowers in 3 months of learning martial arts, while he, who had practiced for 2 whole lives, barely reached the first level. Kim stands up all excited and says he thinks he can now beat Seo. The protagonist smiles, thinking that this is really not the same Yeonho he considered a brother in his past life. This guy was mentally hundreds of times younger than him. The truth is that, at this moment, Seo is almost like a great-great-grandfather to director Kim. In this life, you won't be able to keep up with this guy. Pataki hands over the book and says that from this moment on, they will live separate lives. Kim finds it a bit confusing and wants to know what Seo is saying. Did he do something wrong? What is the reason for them to separate? The reason for the protagonist is that in the first regression, Yeonho became the leader of the Martial Alliance and lost to those guys in the end. And in the second regression, the truth is that things weren't that different. He created more advanced techniques, practiced even more, and basically reached the limit of martial arts. However, he was unable to defeat those guys with martial arts and ended up abandoning them to focus on cultivation. He knows the same thing will happen to Yeonho if he stays close to him his whole life. And to avoid seeing his face of despair again, he then says that in this life, he will walk these lands to improve his own skills. Kim, however, wants to know how he will live without Yeonho nearby. The protagonist says that the martial skills he already possesses should be more than enough for him to strengthen himself. He already knows how to communicate, write, and fight. He was a martial artist at a martial peak, so he didn't have to worry about anything. Kim says he understands, but he didn't want to disconnect from the only person he knows from his homeland. Seo says he understands and then makes a promise. Every 2 years on this exact day, they would meet in this house. And with that, after convincing the director, he left. Blue sky and a guy holding a spear tells him to stay right there and asks what brings him to the Hall of the 8 Respected. Seo says he can't ask for a duel, but the guy bursts out laughing, saying that no one can just walk in here and call for a duel like that. However, in that moment, Seo attacks him with the sword, and in the same second, the guy's spear tears apart. Then he asks the guy if he looked like just anyone. Seo swears that in this life he will do everything possible to become stronger. The protagonist is starting to farm that aura. In the first life, he went hungry, in the second, went hungry again. But in this one, he will probably go hungry again, but at least he will humiliate some guys along the way. As they approach the hall, the young girl from Ho says that the leader is waiting for him. Let's go through the little corridor, and we arrive in front of the boss and everyone stares around. The old man laughs and says he was wondering who the visitor was that seemed to be a first-degree martial artist. He never imagined it would be a young man like him. The protagonist only does. He presents himself and pays his respects to the leaders of the hall. The guy just says it really seemed like he had formidable power, and Seo says it's the same for him. All he asks is for him to bless this inexperienced boy with some teachings. At that moment, the old man pulls out a nunchaku with a sharp tip, while Yun prepares to make a move from the side. Then the chief advances, spinning the nunchaku, saying that since he's going to stall, he'll go first. The item is surrounded by aura and heads straight for the protagonist's eye, but he just pulls out his sword, makes an upward cut, and manages to redirect the attack. The Shaolin monks are all in shock that he managed to reflect the chief's attack, who is now spinning in the arena, saying that the boy has truly reached the level of becoming one with the sword. It seems he was about to advance from his very first stage. The protagonist says the leader seems to have become one with the sword as well. He learned a lot from this single move. The guy laughs and says it's funny that he's at the same level, even though he's so young. Indeed, the boy was a genius. However, the protagonist laughs at the word genius. In fact, he couldn't even see it as a compliment. Everyone looks at him thinking that his martial prowess is impressive, something that would take decades for others to achieve. He reached it before 30. He then thanks the chief for praising his still insufficient skills. However, Sue thinks, in the end, he's still just one of the countless talentless people commonly found in this world. Yet, even without any martial talent or being a chosen one, he was able to develop to this martial feat that now labels him a genius. Indeed, regression, after all, was an opportunity. And since they want him to be one, this time he will act like one, a genius. At that, he informs the chief that from this moment on, he will use sword energy. The guy thanks him and says that's fine then, he will take it seriously. Then Sue unleashes the mountain destruction technique in its first form and the chief dodges to the side. He attacks again with the second form, entering the mountain, the third form ascending vein. However, the chief activates the energy around the nunchaku, and then he performs a series of strikes, which the protagonist defends against. Meanwhile, the guy is trying to understand what kind of kid this is who isn't even 30 and has such monstrous martial skills. At that, the protagonist moves to his side and activates the seventh form of the mountain's depth, and one of the cuts seems to hit the chief's face. The Shaolin monks copy and paste, all shocked, saying it's impossible. How could the leader be pressured by a kid at this age? At that, Seo is already delivering the 12th form, forcing the chief to retreat. Meanwhile, the people in the audience say it's not just speed. Clearly, the boy's sword carried an absurd power behind it. One of the attacks hits, filling the nunchaku, and the chief trembles and looks scared. At that moment, Siu thinks it's time to end this. He jumps into the sky, activating the 7 lights technique, and suddenly, a bunch of shining cuts appear, and the nunchaku is torn apart. The chief looks completely shocked, the Shaolin with his mouth agape, and with that, the guy just falls to the ground and says he lost. Instantly, Siu bows and thanks for the opportunity. He turns and walks away. Everyone is in shock. He walked through the middle of the sect, and everyone watched, whispering and commenting. At least he didn't suffer any ambush because of this. The House of the Ape respected was an orthodox sect then. They followed traditional methods and the moral code. Obviously, Siu, however, wants to go to the unorthodox sects, basically the outlaws. Their first goal in this life was to walk everywhere and reach the Martial Peak. On a mountain, the protagonist recounts that he ventured through numerous medium-sized cities throughout the Sukyung region. Among these, he also lost at the Ilmul sect and the Haiyang sect. He couldn't win. However, he won in Geju and Yango, and now he's at the Hojang sect, delivering a cut to the captain in the purple robe, who is thrown back, falling to the back of the room, unconscious. The old man laughs and says he must be the so-called first-class martial artist who has been challenging numerous places. Indeed, he is a skilled boy. Siu thanks, saying that he has been learning a lot because of these fights. But then the lamp group appears, and the chief says that he will now have to face 10 elders. At that moment, Siu realizes that this is how an unorthodox sect takes revenge. He then says he thought that duel had ended with his victory. He has never heard of consecutive duels, especially one where a person goes against 10. The chief laughs and says it's funny that he has never heard of something like that. Siu then responds that if other sects find out how they operate, the name of Hoyang will go down the drain. However, the chief says that what happens in this duel is that he suffered a small cut, and that cut got infected and he died, unfortunately. The sect took good care of the boy who tried hard to live. But no matter how much everyone did their best, he ended up dying. Unfortunately, as a dead man, he won't be able to deny anything. Siu is already surrounded and sees that these bastards are crazier than he imagined. The chief once again says that his death here will allow their reputation to remain intact. But this is when Siu smiles, thinking that this is exactly why he came to this place. He then says for them to attack. He will accept this ridiculous duel. Everyone advances while he thinks that the moment has come to gain true combat experience. The scene shifts to night in a bar. Everyone is drinking and talking about the martial artist who dared to challenge Hoyang. It was a shame that such a talented boy had died like that. The Mohawk guy said he was crazy too to challenge such outlaws. The white-haired guy laughs as well, saying he was too naive. As if things always happen the way you expect. The other one standing says that all the boy did was accelerate his death thanks to all that arrogance. Hoyang may have the name of a sect, but everyone knows that it is actually a group of bandits. It was a shame that, at that moment, the boy's body should have already been buried. However, someone steps into the hall. One of the waiters turns to welcome him, and it's Siu, completely drenched in sweat. Siu, all cut up, asking for a bucket of instant noodles, please. The guy, completely at a loss for words, just says it's fine and asks him to come in. As Siu stops and the 3 fools are all there now messed up, no one says anything at all. However, the truth is that those bastards almost really killed him. Not only was it 10 against 1, but their blade was also poisoned. The lucky thing is that during the time he worked in the upper echelons of the Alliance, he learned numerous medical techniques. If he hadn't taken the healing pill at that moment, he would have really died in that room. And as soon as he killed the 10 elders, the old man shouted for everyone to kill him now, no matter the cost. At that, all the Alliance members advance in battle formation. In the end, to survive, Siu had to fight like an animal. But there he is, alive and calm in the bar, right after he stabbed the leader in the chest. He didn't kill everyone in the room, but he cut their tendons. In other words, no one will be able to come back for revenge, as they will all be crippled for the rest of their lives. At this, he notices that the Rachi was shaking a lot. He took so many stimulants that it was impossible to relax at that moment. Probably, with the amount he took, he won't even be able to sleep for the next few days. Maybe it was the perfect moment to challenge an orthodox sect. He finished eating, grabbed the sword, and walked out. At that, the legend began to be told. Immediately after his victory against the Hoyang sect, the young martial master ate a bowl of instant noodles and continued his journey. That insane event began to spread his name throughout the people, and a certain rumor began to spread through Seogi. Shortly after, people started calling him by his new martial title, the Spirit of Infinite Fight, Siu Yohyun. His name has swag, the Spirit of Infinite Fight. He goes around fighting. Okay, I respect that. The protagonist knows he doesn't have that much talent. His goal is to reach the martial peak and as far as possible. That's why he needs to keep fighting and fighting, constantly challenging the limits between life and death. For an ordinary man like him to break through that wall of talent, he would have to be a madman. Those without innate potential were forced to embrace insanity. It was the only way a talentless man like him could achieve the power of a genius, and so he traveled to countless regions of Yango, fighting dozens of duels every day against both orthodox and unorthodox sects. 5 years passed. An explosion occurred in the middle of the courtyard. The protagonist jumped, activating once again the mountain-destroying technique. At that moment, his ki was moving in a fluid manner, yet at the same time, extremely destructive. That technique was like the very heart of the sky itself. The key of the sword took the form of lines, something that could only be used by those who had reached the peak. Just trying to form that for a brief moment left his mind utterly exhausted. However, if he couldn't achieve this, there was no way to reach his dreams. At that moment, a guy came from behind delivering a sword strike. Su turned around, managed to defend the attack, the energy dissipated on the blade, and the whole place exploded. The poor guy was thrown against the wall, realizing that the key of the sword he struggled to maintain had been destroyed in a single attack. Then someone emerged from the smoke saying they expected more from the so-called infinite fighting spirit, Seo. However, this time he had won. Obviously, it was the damn director Kim, the strongest man under the heavens. The protagonist got up, realizing that this bastard truly had incredible talent. He congratulated his friend, saying he had indeed become much stronger since the last time they met. Seo noticed that the bastard had already undergone skeletal reconstruction in 5 years. Looking at his hand, he wondered what he had been doing all this time. He was still the same first-degree martial artist. Truly, the lack of talent revealed the worst in people. Shortly after, the director said that after reaching the level of conversion of the 5 energies, he realized something. He had become the strongest man in Yango, and no one could withstand a single attack from him. That's why, as the most powerful man, he was thinking of creating an organization and wanted to offer a seat. Seo, however, cut in and said he was fine. He preferred to live as he had been living. While remembering that this guy in every life always became obsessed with becoming the master of an alliance. However, if he accepted this offer, he would become the vice leader, but in reality, he would work more as a strategist, something he had already done in his entire past life and wasn't interested in. This was because every second he had to practice and reach the martial peak was far too precious. After much effort, Seo managed to decline the organization's offer. But then Kim began to insist that since he didn't want to be part of the association, he should accept one-on-one lessons. However, Seo simply replied that no matter what the director offered, he would not accept. And the reason was quite obvious. He had already learned everything possible from this guy in 2 lifetimes. What he truly needed was real experience. He remembered that in his past life, Yin Wu said that at the end of the first stages, you should face as many real battles as possible. And that's why in this life, he decided to simply watch his friend's saga from afar and continue his own endless journey for battles alone. With that, 20 years passed. Kim arrived in front of the same house and said that this time he looked pale. At that moment, Seo finally realized. His talent was that of someone who had truly been abandoned by the heavens. Kim said that even with infinite training, he still hadn't managed to improve his prowess. Seo said that his knowledge of blade energy exceeded that of any martial artist at his level. Even so, he couldn't last more than 3 attacks against someone at the peak of martial arts. Kim scratched his chin and said that this was strange. He had almost become one with the sword. How had he not reached the martial peak? Someone with so much experience should be able to achieve that easily. Seo thought to himself that he already knew this. This was the limit of his talent. Someone who had truly been abandoned by the heavens. Blood began to flow from his nose, and he said he could only maintain this technique activated for half a day. Perhaps if he could keep it up all day, he would finally find a way. Kim, however, picked up a book and said he wished him the best. This was all he had learned fighting against a cultivator for a short period. He did what he could to maintain his physical form. He managed to withstand a few moves and escaped in the end by a narrow margin. Seo noticed the thickness of the book. It was really as dense as many of the techniques they learned, and he questions whether just escaping from this person really provided that much knowledge. Kim says they were walking natural disasters, and obviously, you need a deep understanding to escape the force of nature. Seo thanks him and says he will preserve this and pass it on to the next generation. Seo then says he will go out in search of another fight like this. All he asks is that they meet again alive. He then says he will give a hint so that he can reach the martial peak. He had to keep each piece of spatial information present in his mind at all times. Seo is a bit confused and asks what he means by that. Kim then comments on how he probably becomes aware of everything around him when he is in the middle of a fight, like, for example, where he can step, what is behind him, where the other enemies are. However, this is something he can only do for a short period in certain parts of the fight. He needed to keep it active all the time. Seo stands there a bit confused. How is he going to do something like that? Just keeping the sword energy technique activated felt like it would tear his head apart. How is he going to simulate everything around him at all times? Basically, his head would definitely explode. However, Kim disappeared, and he is sure. There must be some reason for the strongest man under the heavens to have given him this hint. And from that day on, he began to try to maintain his awareness and all the information that his eyes and ears could convey, trying to remember the spatial position of everything he saw. His awareness seems to be navigating through the city, and he can feel the steps of each person, and in that, he's in the forest. It has been 5 years since he started practicing maintaining the sword energy and spatial awareness. However, every time he opens his eyes, he feels completely nauseous and dizzy. Not only was he absorbing all the visual information, but all the sounds at all times. However, how is he going to fight in a state like this, where he couldn't even look forward? The problem is that he doesn't have much to do. For the last 30 years, he has traveled through all the sects, medium and large, and now there isn't a single one he can visit. Occasionally, he was capturing some bandits and living off the bounty money, having to fight against sneaky enemies who use all kinds of dirty tricks while he is completely dizzy. In that, a guy appears from behind the bush and tells the boss that he found the bastard. The guy with the blade on his back says that today the kid is going to die. However, Sue just prepares himself, saying that even if he dies, he will continue down this path. With that 15 years passed, surprised he says he really survived. Kim, with his face all cut up, says yes. Once again, he came out alive. It has been 45 years since he returned. Finally, he reached the stage where he is proficient in remembering and processing not only what he hears and sees, but even what he touches, tastes, and smells, all at an advanced level. Yet, even so, he couldn't reach the peak of a martial artist. He furrows his brow, wondering how that is possible. At that moment, Kim says that now he's being hunted by cultivators, and it seems they are even paying money to whoever kills him. Two have already tried to set a trap, and he barely escaped. At least this time, he managed to leave a cut on one of their faces. Sue, with his head down, says that apparently he received great knowledge once again. However, Kim says that, in fact, it is not that. He just realized that it is impossible to face a cultivator at the formation stage. If he simply doesn't escape as fast as possible, he will end up as a corpse in the same instant. That is why lately he has been realizing that perhaps this idea of the 5 converging energies is the limit of a martial artist, and perhaps the very author of the techniques he has been practicing must have reached the same conclusion as him. No matter what a mortal like him does, he will never have a chance to defeat a cultivator. At that moment, Sue saw himself in Kim. That guy in front of him had been gifted by the heavens with incredible talent while the protagonist had been abandoned. However, he could perceive that their situations were quite similar. It was funny to see the situation when they were completely different opposites. He tells Kim that he is completely confused and doesn't know why he can't reach the next level. Kim apologizes and says it's strange he can simulate the sword's energy and even his 5 senses have peaked. He has no idea why he hasn't advanced yet. At that moment, he offers, as always, a duel. Maybe they could figure something out since it's been a while since they practiced like this. Under the moonlight, an explosion occurs in the middle of the forest and Sue wonders what the problem is. Kim just says that he really should have reached the peak of martial arts years ago. Sue then wants to know what that means and why something like this is happening to him. Kim then says that even without talent, this should have happened by now. Maybe what he needed was a catalyst. Sue wants to know what he means by that. He explains that there is a strong will or emotion, an event that makes him exceed natural limits and surpass the concentration and talent he possesses. However, Sue loses patience and tells him to explain what the hell he means by that. In the last 50 years of his life, he has done nothing but fight. How desperate would he have to be? He has desperately suffered his whole life trying to break out of this level of a martial artist and finally reach the peak. He activated all the energy his body possesses and even sleeps with the sword, keeping his energy active. At that moment, he can process and memorize any information he experiences in his dreams. He falls to the ground, desperate to know why the heavens do not show him the next step. At that moment, he knew how foolish it seemed for a 70-year-old man to curse the heavens for his fate. However, even having followed the path of the sword his entire life, he still had no idea what the next stage was. Seeing this, Kim makes some cuts with the sword and says he has drawn a martial art that will probably strengthen the weak points he has at this moment. In no way would this guarantee anything, but learning it might help him calm down. The protagonist, seeing the inscriptions on the tree, just says that once again he disappeared into thin air. And with that, 5 years passed. It has been over 50 years since he returned. And now he knows he doesn't have many years left. Looking at the heavens, he asks if Yong-hoon has already died. Apparently, once again, this was the fate of both. His talent ends here. And just like Yong-hoon was unable to do what he wanted, no matter how much mortals suffer, they can never escape the fate of the heavens. However, just then, Kim appears behind him asking what the hell he is talking about. Wow, but he looks finished without 2 arms. Immediately, Sue approaches asking what happened, why he looks so worn out. He says he will go get medicine, but in the same second, Kim flies off with him on his back. Now that I realize is he being carried, but the guy doesn't even have arms? How is he holding on? However, Kim tells him to take a look and sees that they are being chased by the cultivator. This was the price he was paying for blowing off another's arm. Kim, however, is excited, saying that he, Yong-hoon, managed to make a cultivator suffer enough damage to be hunted like this. He finally glints the stage that exists after the conversion of the 5 energies. Finally, with his own eyes, he knows what the limit of a martial artist is. At that moment, a ball of energy appears above, and he says he risked himself for this, spending his own life force to reach this point. Sue realized that this was a strength-themed Kai. And at that moment, he sends this energy attack, saying he managed to destroy a cultivator's arm thanks to this. The energy ball hits the house, destroying half the forest, and he tells Sue to watch. This was the result of his lifelong work practicing martial arts. The protagonist, however, for a second is there saying that this is the house he built after saving money for 50 years. Kim, however, is telling him to look. He fled to this place specifically for his friend to see everything. This is because he wants to leave his legacy in Sue's hands. At that moment, Sue began to get angry, but he decided to stay quiet and just observe this martial performance. The 3-story house he had built after so long was destroyed without a trace. Luckily, he had no servants, otherwise they would have all died instantly. Moreover, it was evident that numerous cuts had been marked on every part of the construction. The energy ball was, in fact, the concentration of countless blades. Truly, it was an unbelievable force, much stronger than any martial art Kim had ever shown. Kim was fleeing, saying that was how he managed to destroy the guy's arm. Before, he had to set ambushes and try to attack them lethally just to have a chance. However, now he could fight them face to face. But as he mentioned this, the energy dissipated, and the two began to fall. Another explosion in the forest. All the trees were destroyed while Kim agonized on the ground, telling him not to forget those techniques. They were the achievements of his life, and what he wanted was for them to be passed on to the next generations. Seo said he understood and told him to be quiet because his life was at stake. It was then that someone up in the tree suddenly said they had finally found the damned martial master in his final form. It was a pity he had fled to such a bad place. He then told the civilian that this guy was a criminal who had committed countless crimes against cultivators, so it was best to leave him there. Seo asked if the guy was there to punish him, and the man just wanted to know if by any chance they were allies. In the same second, however, the protagonist began to run with Kim on his back. The guy from afar, seeing this, just said it was insignificant. He should have already learned the strength he possessed from that so-called friend. But since it was like that, he would interpret it as entertainment and told the guy to run as best as he could. The purple energy spread, and when Seo looked back, there were a bunch of zombies, some corpses of other dead guys. The protagonist continued running, thinking he was too old for something like this. While fleeing, he said that his friend, having received the name of a final martial master, was indeed something quite unique. His friend with that name, and he with the name of an infinite fighting spirit being chased by these zombies. It was truly a strange situation. He kept fleeing, telling his friend to wake up and say something. One of the zombies was about to approach wearing a modern outfit, but received a cut to the neck and fell towards the others. Seo continued fleeing, saying it was the damn Kim who should be carrying him on his back. With that, the escape continued. And, as expected, the zombies kept pursuing relentlessly. The protagonist persevered and kept running. Morning ended, night passed, and he no longer knew how many times the sun had risen and set. Now he was at the edge of a mountain, saying it was indeed higher than he expected. At that moment, the guy on his back said it was scary. A mere civilian managed to withstand this pursuit for 3 days and 3 nights. But there was no way he could escape anymore. Anything he tried was useless. After all, the final martial master was already dead. Seo said that was obvious, especially since he was a doctor. The cultivator wanted to know then why he kept running. He was only interested in the final martial spirit. He didn't care about him. He could have simply abandoned that corpse and fled. Seo, however, laughed, which left the guy confused. The protagonist thought he had really come far with the numerous techniques he had learned. A lifetime of practice, even though the heavens had denied him any kind of talent. Of course, a large part of his power came from the teachings of Yong Hoon, someone from his hometown and his martial mentor. With that, he drew his sword and said that if the guy wanted to take his friend's head, he would have to take his first. The guy lost his patience and said that really no one feared cultivators anymore. Apparently, it was because he either abandoned life or was too old. However, it was fine. He would show that he had enough power to cause a pain much worse than death. Suddenly, 2 arms advanced from the side of Seo and connected to Kim. He looked back, somewhat confused, and the guy replied that they were parasites, and now they would pay the price for trying to humiliate a cultivator. The protagonist just turns around and says that he really was a wicked bastard, while the guy orders the final martial spirit to kill his own disciple. In that moment, Kim screams and delivers the first cut to Seo, who crouches down, turns to the enemy, and asks, how does he have the courage to end the legacy of a man like that? The guy, however, is just smiling while Kim continues attacking. Seo is grateful, and at least it was clear he wasn't able to use martial arts. He was simply using the pure power that the cultivator had placed in him with those arms. However, this strength and speed were far too absurd for him to resist with this old body. He's trembling all over, saying that it was already a terrible disgrace to have to point his sword at Kim, someone who in the end was already dead. He apologizes while thinking that unfortunately there is nothing he can do and he needs to end this as quickly as possible. He then activates the 21 mountain cut technique of the celestial sky. In a flashback, he asked Kim if he knew why this mountain technique was the only one named after a lake and not a mountain. The truth is, it was Kim himself who created it, so our boy is curious to know if this had any special meaning. Kim falls backward and says that the celestial lake reminds him of Lake Hatapup on Mount Baekdu. Apparently, it's a region in Korea where they came from, and Kim thinks that whoever created this technique might have come from Korea just like them. It was then that Kim realized that the technique had this name because it was a lake that reflected the sky and the surrounding mountains. The lake reflects what happens in the skies, yet its surface remains intact. The skies meant everything he had been learning, and the lake that reflected the skies was a meaning of that single attack. Kim seems to take a hit to the core of his body for a second, and Seo explains that this is a technique where, for a short period, he can use the enemy's energy in his own cut. This was a very unique move and a martial art that had been built just for him. If Myung-hun's body remains intact, he will continue to be used as a zombie, and that's why he has to ensure that no part of him stays alive. He will accumulate all the energy in the sword sheath, combine all the techniques, and form all of this into a single attack. When he is about to finally unleash the attack, suddenly Kim starts transforming into a ball of flesh. The protagonist realizes that the damned cultivator had given Kim more power and speed. He knew his life was about to end, so he uses that moment to ensure that his master wouldn't suffer this humiliation. In that, he charges towards Kim, who raises his arms while the protagonist swears to himself that he couldn't die yet. The air around him, the sounds, the smells, the humidity, the temperature, he absorbed each of the sensations around him, even if his brain was about to explode. In that moment, his eye starts to burn, and he says he would turn everything to ashes. However, suddenly, he feels something strange and stops for a second. His brain, which seemed like it was about to explode instead of giving in to all the pressure, seemed to have surpassed something. Seeing himself in a void, he wonders if he fell into some kind of illusion or if he was completely losing his mind. However, it's when he notices some strange red lines coming from Kim's hand. The attack hits the ground hard, but he manages to dodge. Noticing that even his sword now had a strange blue line, he simply follows the path of the line, and the cut lands squarely on Kim's chest. In that moment, he wonders if that is the vision of a martial artist who had reached the peak, and he strangely notices that Kim was smiling. The person who had the talent blessed by the heavens and he with the talent banished from the heavens. They were polar opposites, yet in a way, they were similar. This is because in the end, both had suffered their whole lives trying to escape the fate granted to them by the heavens. He cuts Kim into 50 pieces while saying that at that moment, there was no longer the genius, the Bohun. They were just two men who had suffered against fate their entire lives. One had died and the other was already at death's door. Kim looks back and realizes it was as if his friend was asking if he would really stop there. In that moment, he says no and charges forward, destroying the entire mountain. When all the smoke rises, he is sure that now the end has come. The cultivator looks at him, screaming with hatred, while the protagonist falls, saying that even that guy wouldn't be able to punish his corpse in death. He then asks for his martial master to rest in peace. With that, he finally reached the martial arts level he had desired for so long and put an end to this life of endless efforts. This was the fourth progression. This fourth life was insane, huh? The best so far. Will it keep getting better? I don't know, but I do know that in the next chapter, we're back where it all always begins. He stares at his own hand and realizes he's back. In the past life, he fought from the first day to the last second, and finally managed to conquer. He shouts that he has finally reached the martial peak, the feat he had desired his entire life. At that moment, oh, that guy from the beginning, poor thing, is coming to hit him, the damn Myung-hun, asking what the crazy person is shouting about and saying it's his fault. However, the protagonist sees the strange red line aiming at his face. He ducks with his eyes closed while the guy asks what he thinks he is doing. Yet, even without looking, he could perfectly see where Myung-hun was trying to attack. In his past life, he could also dodge this guy's attacks with his eyes closed. However, it was something different. He was predicting the trajectory of future attacks and understanding this guy's patterns, all attributed to decades of martial arts. But now it was something completely different. It was as if he had a kind of foresight, and even with his eyes closed, he had a total understanding of where this guy was and what he was doing. That's why they say it doesn't matter how many first-level martial artists there are, they will never defeat a martial master. He can completely see the trajectory of any attack from anyone weaker than him. Obviously, someone below that level had no chance at all, and now, instinctively, he could see numerous openings toward Myung-hun. Each of the lines represented the trajectories and positions from which he could attack him, and the red lines allowed him to read what the opponent's attacks were. Probably, it was because the difference between him and Myung-hun was extremely vast that he could see so many openings. However, after a brief analysis, his nose starts to bleed. His brain is burning as he wonders if this is the price of this technique. Myung-hun throws more than one punch, saying he is a son of a bitch who almost killed everyone, but the protagonist just gives him a hit on the back of the neck and he falls hard to the ground. Siu is there with his hand on his head while Kim asks what he is doing. The protagonist is there agonizing in pain while one of the girls wants to know if he got hurt, if he is okay. He is shocked that the pain was so great from using it for a short period on someone as weak as Myung-hun. The sequence was the usual. He calmed everyone down, took them to the cave and cooked some fruits. They slept around the campfire and night fell. Outside, Siu was practicing, even cutting a leaf with a twig. All this without needing to use Qi to strengthen the twig. Now he observed that red is the prediction of movement, while blue is the path to the target. Using this technique, he can see the movement of any opponent or even anything that exists. Now was explained what Kim meant by the memory of all five senses. His friend made him strengthen his vision and everything else this way so that eventually he could calculate the trajectory of opponents. From the tip of the twig, he could see how to destroy each of those leaves. Indeed, the martial vision was incredible. In that moment, he stares at the moon, concentrates for a second, and when he opens his eyes, there are several people attacking him. In a second, with one movement, however, he sees the blue line on all of them and starts attacking and destroying each one. The sun was already rising and he was happy, saying he had finally reached the martial peak. Obviously, even so, his head was still almost exploding, and that was because he was fighting against leaves. Soon after, he grabbed the 8 bamboo roots and began to practice with them. Strengthening his body, he was already able to maintain his vision for at least 3 hours. In this life, he's strong enough to do whatever he wants with everyone, especially since he doesn't have to sell anything, as he can earn money just with martial power. Back in the cave, he is taking a look at Kim. This guy went through 6 volumes of everything he had found for him, and he even managed to see the final teachings before he died. This was all the knowledge he had to pass on to Kim. For sure, Kim Myung-hoon in this life would surpass the one in the next, which also means that what Kim will teach him this time will be even further from what he imagines. He has no idea how he will reach the next stage. However, unlike his coworkers, there's nothing he can do but train endlessly, keep practicing the vision technique and get his mind used to it. The first goal of this life was to feel no pain when using this technique and finally reach the level of the 3 flowers. That's the level Kim usually reaches in 3 years of training, right? My God, what an unfair life. The protagonist, however, says that he will finally live like someone at the pinnacle of the martial world. The next morning arrived, and as always, the fox, who is the master of the forest, came in this life to collect her price. Siu stretches out his arm, and at that moment, he becomes curious. How many red lines would he see if he took a look at the fox? However, a glare from her actually reveals a red shockwave. He feels a bit confused, not understanding what happened, and the fox bites his arm right away. Even though his arm was being bitten, he was more curious to know how the whole view had turned red. A few days later, the floaters arrived again, and once more he was startled. No matter where he looked, all he saw was a stream of red energy spreading. This was the difference between a martial artist and a cultivator that Kim talked about so much. There was absolutely no opening. Indeed, the most powerful martial artist would struggle against the weakest cultivator. A few days later, he decided to ask something to the Master of the Seas. He humbly introduces himself and says he is curious about something. Huil wants to know what it is, and the protagonist tells him about what he saw, about a strange sphere of red energy around the guys who came before him. Huil explains that those men possess a kind of consciousness. Some even said it was something like divine power. The simple explanation is that while a mortal's consciousness is trapped in their head, a cultivator's can engulf the surrounding area. And he leaves saying that as a spiritual being, he also has this ability and tells the boy that his curiosity should be satisfied. As they were speaking in the local language, Kim, who hadn't learned anything, was completely confused. Shortly after Huil left, the old hunchback appeared, took the girl, and expelled them once again. But strangely, this time they fell into the water. Siu was twisting his shirt, wondering why this time was completely different. Kim comes out of the water all twisted, wanting to know where they are, to which Siu only replies that it's a completely different place. Looking around, he knows this is Yangbo Lake and the city of Xiangho should be nearby. Kim wants to know what they will do, where they will find people. They need to find at least a base there, something like that to seek direction. In that, the protagonist tells him to take a look over at the corner on the other side of a lake. It was possible to see a small town, so they would probably find what they needed to know over there. Before Kim could agree, Siu had already jumped into the water and told him to wait there while he swam, asking why as he twisted his clothes. However, the most important thing is that if memory serves, that place was a center for various bandits. He went there to clean those guys up in his past life. The leader of those guys was at the final stages of the first degree, while the vice leader was still in the middle of the first stage. The rest of the crew was all small fry, but there were many, so he poisoned his sword to deal with it easily. In that, one of the bandits is looking to the side, asking what the hell that is. There was a kid suddenly coming out of the water. The protagonist keeps advancing while the guy tells him to stay still if he doesn't want to die. However, before Siu could do anything, the kid already came at him swinging a club. The protagonist, however, advances, hitting the guy in the chest with his shoulder, sending him straight to the ground. In that moment, he grabs the guy's weapon and points it at the other, telling him it's best to say how many people he has killed. The thug says he's a son of a bitch and warns that he has killed 50. Just as he's about to finish speaking, the Siu has already cut off his head. The guys are all scared, grinding their teeth, while the protagonist says that from now on, anyone who has killed a person should come at him. In another part of the bandits' base, some women serve something to the guys. The guys are all telling the women to obey, when suddenly one of them stops and asks what commotion is happening outside. Suddenly, the door opens and Siu is holding someone's head. At that, the boss, without leaving his throne, just says there's a little rat in the base and everyone should draw their weapons. Siu then simply states that in this room he won't ask anything since everyone will die. Shortly after, the entire base is covered in bodies and the boss is lying on the ground begging for mercy. Siu, however, only wants to know how long he has been there. The boss says he arrived 15 minutes ago, and Siu thinks that in his past life, it took him an entire day. He had to set the place on fire, use poison, and it was extremely difficult, but now he managed to end everything with a branch and in 15 minutes. The boss tells him to wait, saying he can show where there is treasure, but the protagonist just cuts off his head, saying he already knows very well, especially since he has done this before. Then he opens some cages, and everyone who was trapped in that place is freed and thanks him for avenging the bandits. One in front humbly asks him to reveal what his title is in this martial world. They would ensure that one day they would repay this debt. Siu stands there thinking about this, what is the title? And then says the usual one, the spirit of infinite struggle. And the title is fitting, you see, because the boy fell into the water, swam out, and finished off the bandits. With that, the protagonist went with director Kim to the city of Chango, bought identification plates, and also a house for both of them with the bandits' money. After that, he has always taught martial arts and writing to Kim. 2 months later, he was reaching the level of the 3 petals. Siu realizes that the more he learns, the faster Kim is also able to evolve. As always, watching that made him want to give up, but he has felt that way forever. For him, it takes a lifetime to reach the martial peak, while Kim simply skips all the stages and reaches the pinnacle. The protagonist congratulates his friend, saying it's amazing that he reached this level even before understanding how to read properly. Kim says he is also surprised to think he had such good martial talent. Seo is now thoughtful. He's never had a real duel with Kim at the moment he reaches the level of the 3 flowers, because this guy is always trying to teach more than to truly duel. But how would a duel be now? Him who has reached the martial peak, or Kim who has just reached the level of the 3 flowers? In that moment, he offers a duel to his friend, who says it sounds good. Maybe now he has a chance to beat the kid. Back in a forest, the protagonist makes a cut that tears the entire ground. What matters is that from mid-air, he sends a sequence of attacks from the peak of the mountain dragon, and the red lines appear. The protagonist can see that the better Kim gets, the fewer blue lines he has and the more red ones appear. He needed to keep dodging, but at this pace, he would never create an opening. And for some strange reason, a strange desire to win began to burn in his heart. At that moment, he understands that this time is the last chance he will have to beat Kim in this reincarnation. This guy will continue to evolve at a frightening speed, and the next time they face each other, he won't even be able to dream of beating him. The protagonist is thrown back, knowing that at this moment, when he has just reached the 3 petals, it is the only moment he can win in this life, so he decides it's time to go all out. He pulls some things from his fingers and sends them in his direction, and Kim is surprised but manages to defend himself. The protagonist realizes that at least he interrupted the rhythm of the guy's movements and decides to show that he is ahead in combat experience. The sword is plunged into the ground and he unleashes a devastating barrage. Kim, seeing this, smiles and says he will have to show him the power of the 3 flowers stage. At that moment, the protagonist felt that some danger was approaching. Then Kim throws the sword up, activating a blade key, and sends a slash towards Seo. He knew he would be torn in half if he tried to confront that attack. However, the mountain destruction technique he learned was taught by Kim himself, but Kim had already reached the level of 5 conversions. Then he unleashes the Echo Valley, and an explosion sweeps through the forest. Amid all the smoke, you can see the little bald hairs floating, and he says that the kid is truly amazing. The protagonist, however, is shocked that this bastard actually withstood his attack. Then the blade falls to the ground, and he says he gives up. It's Kim who gives up, saying that his weapon broke. He really was a disgrace as a martial artist. He has to admit, Seo was very experienced. The protagonist, however, tells him not to worry. He will never be able to defeat him again. And with that, he just accepts the reality of his life. With Sadie's fight, it marks the last day he will be stronger than Kim until the next life. Wow, that's really harsh, right? He just reincarnated man. He already knows that soon his friend will be unreachable. Back at home, the protagonist says that since his friend reached the peak of the 3 flowers, he prepared a gift. Kim responds that the duel was already an incredible gift, but Seo brings a bunch of books, saying these are the writings of someone who got close to cultivation and exceeded martial arts. He bought them from an old man in the city who said that to reach this level, a person must have at least 3 flowers. The protagonist read a bit, but unfortunately, he couldn't understand anything, so he will leave it in his friend's hands. Kim thanks him, saying that if that's the case, he will definitely dedicate himself. After learning to read, Kim began to focus on these studies. 4 months later, Seo enters excitedly, saying he brought some money and managed to hunt a good guy today. However, strangely, the books were lying on the floor, open. Seo is a bit confused because he couldn't feel his friend's presence, who suddenly appears out of thin air, startling the protagonist. The friend explains that he learned the techniques in those writings, the so-called powers that exceed martial arts. He's impressed that Seo also couldn't locate him. These martial arts were truly incredible. The protagonist, however, is scared. He remembers that strange technique from when Kim used to visit him, but normally he only showed that ability when he reached the power of the 5 energies converging at the center. But how is he already using this if only a year has passed since the regression? And then Kim says that if a martial master like Seo couldn't perceive him, he could probably kill anyone. Seo, it's tough for the kid indeed. Even knowing this would happen, that Kim would continue to evolve, talent was something hard to accept. Then, Kim says he is determined to travel the lands for combat experience and invites Seo to go along. The protagonist, however, says he's not really interested. He believes he should focus on stabilizing his understanding of the martial peak. Kim ponders and says it makes sense, especially since he is still learning to use the blade line. The protagonist angrily says yes, and besides that, he's interested in the imperial regime. He wants a position in the government, and maybe the time will come when he can help Kim. And with that, for now, each went their separate ways. However, it's obvious that Seo had other reasons for wanting to enter the imperial regime. From the information he gathered in the Martial Alliance, the imperial family was closer to the cultivators than any other organization. Many even say that the main family of Yango was actually collateral, related to the cultivators themselves, and that's why he registered for the Yango military. They readily accepted him since he already had a certain fame for hunting numerous bandits. With the power he had already developed, he easily became a general. With that, he applied to become Imperial Guard and passed easily. He's all in black with swag sly one. And all of this he achieved with just 5 years of regression. In this, a guy says that his job is to put his life on the line to protect the majesty. And a martial artist at his peak could definitely do that. Siu pounds his chest and says he can count on him. And with that, he starts to become part of the shadow guards of the Imperial Palace. He was already placed in position as soon as he learned the techniques to hide his breath and the espionage techniques. And on the day he met the Emperor, he discovered something truly surprising. The Emperor of that place was a cultivator. He has a crazy look. This becomes instantly obvious because he had the awareness of a cultivator. And now he knows that this was a bastard who was born with a spiritual root. Moreover, the slightest doubts of the protagonist were shattered when he met the rest of the Emperor's family. Most were cultivators with consciousnesses that clashed with his. One thing he notices, however, is that these guys didn't seem to be of such a high rank. No one came close to that fox. At least it was clear that they did have a small aura of consciousness around them, probably in the initial realms of refinement. Obviously, the Emperor's consciousness was much broader and farther than all these guys. With that power alone, he was stronger than all the Shadow Guards combined. The truth is that he, as a Shadow Guard, exists only because the Emperor is too lazy to kill the assassins. Obviously, that guy was the man who had been attempted to be killed the most in the Empire. People had been trying to kill him every night, and here's our protagonist tearing another one in half. At least it was good that he was gaining a bit of experience. And so 5 years passed with him serving the Empire as part of the Shadow Group. In the meantime, Kim became the leader of the Martial Alliance, and he now is a member of the Shadows. Couldn't find a person who was the leader of the Alliance. So they usually met secretly and drank with each other. And it was then that he started noticing something interesting. The red lines have always been the best trajectory for someone to attack, and now Kim is exuding countless lines from numerous angles. It's almost as if there's no place around Kim that he isn't safe. In this, he notices that what surrounded Kim was quite familiar. In fact, it reminded him of the consciousness of a cultivator. It was a pity that it was almost incomprehensible to him. If only he had reached the Three Flowers stage, he would have been able to understand a bit of this. However, there's not much to do, so all he can do is continue observing Kim's current condition to understand how one day he might get there. He has no idea what exactly Kim is doing, but he feels that maybe this is the way for him to master the sword. At that moment, Kim starts to absorb the air, and that's when he undergoes the skeletal transformation, also known as plastic surgery. I think the Chinese invented this for when someone has surgery to say, "No, I didn't have surgery. I underwent skeletal transformation." In this, the protagonist congratulates him, saying he looks much younger. Kim says yes, he finally reached the point of converting 5 energies into a core. It's just a pity for the boy because if he were at a higher level, he would have learned much more from this. The protagonist agrees, saying he thought the same thing, but it's his fault for having such mediocre skills. A little later in the forest, Siu asks if his friend has met any cultivators, and he says yes. In this, Siu says that the domain around his friend was quite similar to the consciousness of those guys. Could there be some relation between them? Kim says yes. Near this region he possesses, he can face a cultivator at the refinement stage. Probably humans who can reach the level of convergence of the 5 energies can achieve something like this. The protagonist realizes that it's interesting. There's a chance for a martial artist to actually defeat a cultivator. Just as the difference between a first-degree martial artist and someone who has reached the martial peak is extremely distant, almost incomprehensible, the same must happen with Kim's next levels. More and more, he won't be able to understand what's happening with his friend. However, perhaps today's experience will help him one day also reach this conversion of the 5 energies. With that, their conversation ended, and sometime later, Kim returned to work. A few days later, when he was working as a guard, he saw an assassin moving on the upper part of the palace. At that moment, he feels a red line coming towards him and knows that this guy is at the martial peak. The sword comes, but he easily manages to defend himself. Seeing the way the person fights, it's someone who has just reached the martial peak. The guy lunges towards Siu, who easily deflects all the attacks. He had been very thoughtful lately. He should have been focused on this fight. However, the image of Kim at the moment he evolved wouldn't leave his mind. He wonders if that had to do with the sword's energy. The aura on his blade proved that he was already evolving in that aspect, or at least reaching the intermediate stage of the first degree. This happens the moment you reach the martial peak because as long as the sword is following the best path, it always carries an aura. The blue lines are always the best possible path that the sword art seeks. It's basically about maximizing his potential to the fullest. What he learned lately is that the martial sword arts and the blade's energy are really the same thing. However, he soon thinks that this doesn't make sense because if it were really like that when his friend turned into a zombie, he should have continued using the blade's aura, but that didn't happen. Thus, he concludes that something human must be behind the attack and realizes that perhaps it's the intention of the martial artist performing the strike. The red and blue lines are not only the attack, but also the intentions of the artist using the sword. The moment he reached this conclusion, he felt something strange while holding the sword. It was as if veins and arteries had come out of the sword and entered his arm. The assassin lunges once more to try to kill him, but Siu sends a slash in his direction, apparently tearing through the assassin because blood gushed out and the girl was thrown away. My god, the poor girl spun like a Beyblade, while the protagonist is there thinking that this wasn't the end. If he keeps feeding the sword with his intentions, he could advance even faster. The poor girl is looking on, not understanding what is happening, while the protagonist is still in his monologue, realizing that he finally managed to make this something real. After 10 years practicing as a master at the martial peak, he finally learned the silk of the sword or the line of the sword. And with that, he had reached the intermediate levels of the peak. The girl remains fallen on the ground while he approaches slowly and notices a familiar face. She was one of the maids who had recently been hired. He comments that her reaching the martial peak at such a young age was impressive. If she had survived, she might have had enough talent to reach the 3 flowers. The girl, however, from the ground asks if he is the so-called infinite fighting spirit. The protagonist is confused because she knew that name. 10 years ago, when he saved those guys, he gave that title. However, in the city of Yangon, they call him the monster of infinite fighting. Then the girl says that her brother is much more talented than she was. However, it was all the damned emperor's fault. Kim only replies that appealing to emotions won't do any good. The rule here is to kill any assassin who has entered this place immediately. At that moment, the rest of the guards are arriving, shouting and saying that there is an assassin here. The girl keeps telling the protagonist that he is doing it wrong. The emperor's orders, "Goodbye, daughter." He cut her off, saying that unfortunately, the act of listening to an assassin is itself a crime. So he has to finish this now. Who thought the girl would last in this life? I think she will appear in the next ones. But in this one, she had 2 minutes of screen time. After feeling disappointed for having destroyed someone with so much talent, the protagonist disposed of the body with the rest of the guards. The commotion was great, but so far the emperor hadn't left his room for a second. Moreover, at the door, he had applied his silence technique. It was more than clear that the emperor didn't care if anyone knew he was a cultivator. After all the shadow guards already know that. The minimum to become a guard was to reach the martial peak, and at that moment, you could already see the cultivator's aura with your own eyes. However, everyone there continues to protect him, as that is the job they were given. And strangely, recently, the number of murders has been increasing significantly. What is strange is that Yang O has been going through a period of extreme prosperity. Obviously, there were still people in poverty, but it was no longer necessary for everyone to become bandits or anything like that. So who is so eager for the emperor to be killed? And why did a person from Yango who knows his title comment on this? He turns, thinking that, well, he has time to figure everything out. After all, on the other hand, he is more interested in the cultivators than in the assassins. With that, 10 years passed, and the protagonist gained enough trust from the emperor through his hard work to have the authority to look into more information about the imperial family. Of course, he couldn't look at the biggest secrets, but now he could examine documents and find clues about the cultivators. And it seems he finally found the location of the cultivators. The problem is that it was taking too long and wasn't as easy as he imagined. The place they were located was much better than when he was just the strategist of the Alliance. And thanks to the experience he gains every night and how much he can observe people, maybe he will really reach the level of the 3 flowers. With that, he decides to take a look at the census of things and notes that in the 33rd year, it seems the number of orphans has significantly reduced because of your majesty. And as a result, this decreased the influx of bandits. The protagonist finds it a bit strange. This information was too simple for a government document. Moreover, the most important thing was left out. How did the number of beggars in the city decrease? Did they all starve and die? However, if so many people had really died at the same time, he would have known in his past life. And it doesn't mention anything about them having escaped poverty or about the emperor helping them find a better way to earn money. It only says they disappeared. The protagonist remembers the girl from 10 years ago who said that people were dying at the hands of the emperor. However, he finds it strange. The current emperor wasn't a bad guy in terms of ability. He wasn't the best leader of all, but at least he was average. So where did all these erased people go? If it's something that not even the official documents record, it means it's the cultivators doing. Any missing information is always related to them. Perhaps you will have to investigate this further later with Kim's help. The scene then shifts to the Marin Alliance. At Kim's retirement ceremony, many seem sad and disappointed, but Kim looked happy. This is because he only retires at the moment he learns the 6 levels of the cultivation gaze scriptures. In other words, it was time for him to hunt those guys. The protagonist opens the door and says he seems quite happy. Kim turns, saying he thought he was an assassin, but he is a friend. His aura has indeed been changing more and more, and now he really reminds him of an assassin. It's true. Is the protagonist going to change a lot emotionally? That now, like, he's becoming more cruel and killing everyone. I saw on the cover of this story, there's a picture of him all in black, all badass. So you know, with that, the protagonist tells Kim everything about the information he gathered while working for the government. It is clearly a spy from those guys. Since it involved the cultivators, it was obvious that Kim was very interested. Sue warned that he would cover all the regions where the cultivators reside and ask Kim to gather information. And with that together, they began to try to understand more about the cultivators. One night, sometime later, one of the soldiers reports that the north gate is secure. Sue noticed that lately the frequency of assassins has decreased. It also wasn't possible for the enemies to send artists to the Martial Peak constantly like this. However, in the memory he thinks this, there is a fire happening in front of him and a guy burning. Someone warned that the assassins had arrived and were at the east gate. A guy comes holding a talisman, asking if everyone there is at the Martial Peak. And the guy says that this vision technique is a disgrace because it prevents him from arriving secretly. The worst that Seo imagined happened. This time they sent a cultivator as an assassin. The white-haired uncle in front told everyone to prepare, while the talisman guy says it's funny that they think they have any chance of defeating him. They might think they have some chance against someone at the first stage, but he was already at the second. With that, the aura begins to spread along with the talismans burning, and he says that today he was going to kill everyone there, and kill those bastards who are from his secondary family of the Mekli clan. With that, everyone starts to burn in the hall, agonizing while the guy laughs. However, amidst the flames, look who is there. The cultivator was impressed that he survived this attack. I say that for a filthy insect, his gaze is quite arrogant for someone who only blocked an attack, nothing more. Things are getting intense. However, the next chapter begins with a sword breaking. Actually, it's a guy launching an attack and realizing there's a barrier around the palace and no one can enter. The talisman is blocking everything, meaning they already know it's some cultivator this time. They would need more troops. Inside, everyone is on the ground, agonizing while the explosion is happening back and forth. Seo is in a rush, cutting everywhere, saying he can't stop for even a second. He needed to evolve his sword from Silk Blade to Strengthening K. The talisman guy, however, is just laughing, asking how many times he will have to repeat it. It's impossible for him to break this barrier with the power he possesses. Seo's attack hits the barrier hard while the guy laughs. However, the energies begin to clash and the barrier starts to crack. With that, he managed to bend the barrier and push the guy back. The problem for Seo is that he is trying to maintain this technique activated, of which he barely has any idea of its use, and in the same second, he is thrown far away. Before the guys could do anything, the talisman dude advances and kicks him in the middle of the back, wanting to know how an inferior creature had the courage to cut him like that. He wanted to play with the kid before killing the rest of the bastards in this place, but he changed his mind. He will impale him on spikes until he is completely unrecognizable. The rest of the friends try to get up calling for the vice leader. They advance in the attack, but they are all pierced as well. And the guy just turns around and warns that no one should interrupt him at this moment. They were all insects that had no chance of winning, so it was good for them to realize that their fate would end under his foot. The guys obviously want to advance, but all hesitating. I don't blame the poor souls either. It's certain death. While Seo is on the ground, he realizes he's screwed this time. His whole body inside is destroyed. The talisman guy, however, crushes his hand, asking if he is still alive. He wants to know how long this insect will hold on. Seo just thinks that he really wasn't different from an insect. The talent he has, the skills he possesses, and the life he leads. All of them truly represented the useless life of an insect. The talisman guy is a bit confused and asks what he is talking about. Is he asking to be left alive? However, Seo is there thinking that he is trained for ages and everything he has lived through hasn't disappeared. He begins to raise his hand, all destroyed, while thinking that he realized at the moment this guy used hiding techniques. He had so much talent that he never trained his own body or knew how to fight considering the correct distance from enemies. He's merely someone born with enough talent to have been blessed by the heavens and become a cultivator. He could lose to this bastard and could die by confronting this guy, but completely destroyed, he holds the guy's clothes, saying he won't accept that everything he has been through, all the effort he has been putting into this life, wasn't enough to reach a higher stage. This bastard wouldn't be the one to make him give up. And with that, he shouts, saying that even the effort of an insect carried some meaning. The talisman guy falls to the ground confused, telling the bastard to let go of his hand, but at the same time, he's a bit confused with his nose bleeding. Seo realizes that the poison has started to work. The temporary technique he forced to break that barrier was just to, for a moment, create the chance to cause a cut and poison this guy. The cultivator is starting to bleed from his eye and nose, saying he has to nullify this. However, Seo approaches asking if he really thinks he will let something like that happen. Now he will taste the flavor of the insect he wanted to humiliate. With that, he covers the guy's mouth because most detoxification powers needed enchantments. He grabs his hand to prevent the guy from using any kind of seal to nullify the poison. And in that, he tells the bastard to try to do something. Meanwhile, the rest of the people around urge him to help Seo, while outside the talisman starts to break and people begin to invade the castle. Shortly after, the protagonist is being taken away, saying that the bastard called him an insect, but he didn't die much differently than one. Wow. The protagonist killed a cultivator. Talk about a goat. I didn't see that coming. Damn, he already killed the first one. Now I'm eager to see how this will affect his life. In the next chapter, he sees a lot of smoke in front of him. He wakes up next to the doctor, asking if it's right to smoke around a patient, who replies that tobacco is an extremely healthy herb and would improve his health. For some reason, I thought he would wake up next to a hot female doctor because every work is like that, but no, this is real life. He woke up next to the old man, and that's what he got, and he wonders why this bastard thinks tobacco is good for him. That's when he remembers its ancient times. Then the guy says that His Majesty sent an imperial doctor for him, so he should be grateful for all this generosity. Right away, Seo notices that his body really felt light. This guy was extremely skilled, and he wanted to learn all the methods. Then the guy says that the person who healed him warned that his arm would recover, but it would never be the same as before. He still needed to rest a lot, so it was best not to overexert himself. The protagonist remembers that the cultivator completely crushed his arm. Obviously, he wouldn't come out unscathed, and he responds that he's already happy that he can use this in some way. Observing a blue box, the guy also says that the emperor was impressed with the boy's willpower and gave him a reward. Unfortunately, the Emperor himself cannot give anything to the Shadow Soldiers, so it's kind of this guy who will deliver it to him. Then the guy makes a speech saying that in the name of His Majesty, the Vice Guard of the Shadow Leaders, Seo risked his life to defend his throne and is therefore received with a void pill. Upon opening it, he sees a strange red pill, and the guy says that it seems to be an essential key to building a person's K. Something about the stages of refinement before cultivation, however, the old man has no idea what that means exactly. Seo, observing, knows that it is a pill made from the remnants of a true K-building pill. Back when he worked as a doctor, he also made some elixirs. And every time an elixir is made, there are some remnants that can be used to make something slightly inferior. Basically, the essence of that item had already been lost. Wow, and the protagonist realizes that the Emperor probably doesn't think most people have this knowledge. The effect of this will be so minimal that it serves more as a remedy for curing a hangover. He never imagined the Emperor would be so selfish to this extent. The old man, however, says that from what he heard, anyone who consumes this item and is immortal can increase their lifespan by 10 years. Seo is surprised. That didn't seem to make any sense. However, the old man really seemed quite interested in the item, even though he obviously couldn't steal something given by the Emperor. Seo then thanks him and says he will use the pill as soon as his energy stabilizes. The guy leaves, telling him not to forget the Majesty's kindness, but Seo thinks that he will actually keep this for a long time. He won't eat it now while he has plenty of energy left, but rather when he's about to die to see if it really can extend his lifespan. Now the rascal got excited, saying that working for the Empire really comes with many benefits. Being able to live 10 more years was something grand, as with that you would evolve even more in this life. It really was the right choice to join the Imperial Guard, and he feels good about what will happen in this life. I have a feeling that it won't be quite like that. He's too happy, my friend. Yeah, the fun's over. The sword rolls on the ground, and he looks at his completely destroyed hand. His body had healed completely, but now every time he holds the sword, an immense pain shoots through his arm and he ends up dropping it. He can't even use the 24 basic techniques of the mountain, and now he's already wondering if this marks the end of his life in martial arts. However, he tells himself no. Life on the martial path has always been full of suffering, so what if he now has to add a little pain to this path? It has always accompanied him like a shadow, so it won't be this pain that makes him give up. In fact, he will use this opportunity to further enhance his prowess, and with that, 10 years have passed, 30 in total of this regression. He has gotten used to using the sword, and his ability to control the silk of the blade has also improved. Moreover, he is becoming increasingly skilled at using hidden weapons, as he works as a shadow. Additionally, Kim has recently been sending some letters warning that the secret of the cultivators was about to be discovered. These guys live in places hidden from the rest of the world, with barriers that make the locations where they are completely invisible and inaccessible. The weaker cultivators do create mansions among mortals, but the truly powerful live behind those barriers. It is said that there are certain normal humans who live with the cultivators. This is because these guys obviously need slaves and servants to do everything they want. And according to what Kim has been studying, it seems that those responsible for sending assassins to kill the Emperor are all from the Cultivator clan. They recruit mortals within their domain and train them to become peak assassins. And now he is starting to understand the situation. The poor who disappear have probably been sent to these guys. They are raised from childhood to work as assassins or simply as slaves for these people. And considering how the assassins are being sent to kill the Emperor, it is probably some kind of clan dispute. However, even with all this knowledge, it is not his time to focus on that, but rather to focus on martial arts. Just then, Kim appears, asking what he is murmuring about. Seo explains that he just read the letter, and Kim says he sent it a month ago. It really took a while to arrive. He mentions that he came to visit because he discovered something extremely frightening. Seo wants to know, but Kim says that first they have to remove this suspicious magic. He then explains that there were 2 clans of cultivators in the Yango region. The Makli clan, which is currently the family dominating everything, and the former imperial clan that ruled, known as the Jin clan. For countless decades, these 2 clans have been secretly fighting each other for the nation's resources. And the Makli finally managed to expel the Jin from the region, which lost power hundreds of years ago. The moment the Makli clan took control of the city, obviously the Jin clan lost a good part of its members and significance. That is why these guys have even been training mortals to become assassins. Seo responds that he already knew all of this because of the letter. Then Kim says that the important part comes now. How does he think the Jin clan was able to create so many mortals who reached the martial peak? It was almost as if they had a factory. He explains that most people who reach the mortal peak are accepting vengeful spirits from their own family. This pulls all the life force and willpower at that moment, as well as pushing their natural talent to the maximum limit. The confused protagonist asks if the Jin clan is killing family members to use as vengeful spirits. However, Kim explains that no. In fact, it is the current regime that killed the families of all these people. The protagonist doesn't seem to understand, and Kim explains that this current clan, the Makli clan, has been kidnapping orphans, beggars, and any kind of poor farmer to turn them into elixirs. With the innate energy they manage to steal from people's lives, they create pills that extend their lifespan. And obviously, to collect as many people as possible as elixirs, they kidnap the base of society. Seo says that this is basically a kind of cannibalism, to which Kim replies that yes, he is right, these guys are literally eating humans. Siu can't believe it. These guys are not of demonic roots, so why are they doing something like this? In theory, cultivators are those who follow Taoist principles. Their intention was to ascend to the heavens. So why would they be doing something like this on Earth? At this point, he remembers the girl who mourned that people were dying at the hands of the Emperor, yet he had also dedicated his entire life to protecting those bastards. In the end, he had also killed countless innocent people with his own hands. Kim then says that while he was investigating the Mekli clan, he was contacted by the cultivators of the Jin clan. They offered him an opportunity to attack that clan, and he decided to join. They could no longer allow those human-consuming scum to remain alive. Beings as evil as these could not continue to control this nation. He had been going through numerous martial sects looking for masters to join this cause and asks Siu to join him. If the Jin clan regains the throne, things will at least be better than those damned Mekli clan members who are consuming everyone. At this, Siu wonders if in that life where he died to the cultivators, the real reason behind all this was this story. And yet, for this stupid cause, he has been wasting his life. With that, he says it's fine, he will also participate. Thus, he left the palace with Kim that day to join the forces planning to attack the Empire's cultivators. They arrive at the pavilion in the city of Sikyo, where all the best martial artists of Yango had gathered. There were the elders of the 4 stars and even the 3 demons. All the masters of the best sects in the region were indeed present. Everyone there had reached the martial peak and even had 10 martial masters who had reached the level of the 3 flowers. If it weren't for the existence of the cultivators, these guys alone could conquer the entire empire. One of the old men, however, wants to know, why did they bring a guy who works for the government? They can't trust someone so close to the emperor. And the other one there agrees, saying he doesn't trust anyone associated with the government. The protagonist takes a deep breath and shouts, "That emperor is a son of a bitch. This kid is crazy in the head," they think. He continues saying that guy is a bastard, and the old man already says he understands and trusts that the kid doesn't like the emperor. Siu just wipes his face, saying it's a shame because he still had a lot to say. With this, the martial masters accepted him and they set off together to destroy a demon base. Upon arriving there, he sees a group with a red-haired person staring, saying their strength isn't bad at all. However, what surprises Siu is that these guys were wearing the same type of clothing as that guy of the talisman. In other words, that guy he killed was indeed a cultivator of the Jin clan. Kim tells the red-haired guy that he kept his promise and brought everyone who agreed. He hopes they can accept this help to kill those bastards. The man only replies that yes, everyone should prepare to leave. At this, Siu asks where Kim is going, who asks him to follow. They then arrive in front of a cemetery full of bodies. Everyone there had been killed by the Mekli clan. He recovered as many bodies as he could to at least make some graves. Siu asks if he did all this alone. However, Kim just activates a magic from the path of the heavens and says that the souls of everyone there were filled with vengeance for being killed by those bastards. And to allow them to depart, he learned some spells that showed the way for them. It was good for Yun to never forget that not all power used by a cultivator is something disgusting and cruel. The important thing is how this strength is used. And that's why keeping your heart as a human at all times was as important as continuing to grow stronger. Siu is there somewhat speechless, and his friend says the time to leave has come. In another part of the mountain, someone joins their fingers and says they will open the way to the entrance of the Mekli clan. With that, the landscape of the forest suddenly transforms into a castle. Siu is completely confused. The view around has changed completely. However, at the same time, the air took on a horrible smell of blood and rotting corpses. From the walls, someone shouts that intruders have arrived, and it was the Dan Jin clan that finally attacked. Suddenly, a barrier rises protecting the entire place, and the red-haired chief says that as always their protective skill was excellent. At this, Kim steps forward, and the guy in the back wants to know who this mortal is that is going ahead of everyone. He's acting as if he has some permission. The chief, however, says he may be a mortal, but he is special. He knows it's hard to believe, but in terms of prowess, they were on equal footing. In this, Kim starts to concentrate energy in his hand, look at the Rasengan coming, and the protagonist remembers that this was the same explosion that destroyed his house. The energies that convert the origin, and with that the attack collides with the barrier sweeping the entire place. The Jin clan members are all shocked with their mouths agape, and the barrier has a crater, from which a bunch of zombies starts to emerge from the gates. At that moment, the chief shouts for them to pass through these creatures and enter the castles. Siu goes through cutting everyone while the Mekli clan members are scared, saying that the damned ones really brought numerous top martial artists, they needed reinforcements. The protagonist, however, recognizes those damn zombies and those familiar clothes. That bastard from before who made that bunch of zombies and did that to Kim was indeed from the Mekli clan. What he finds strange, however, is that he could see lines of intentions in the zombies. But zombies were supposed to be will-less creatures, so what's happening? Perhaps the will of the cultivators controlling these zombies, but that also wouldn't make sense. It's when he notices a guy on the battlefield with an aura around him and the zombies protecting him. Judging by the size of the consciousness, he realizes that this guy was still in the first stage of refinement. He boldly advanced and cut through the guy's barrier and then sliced his forehead. Then he was already poisoned. The guy is begging to be spared there while Siu tells him to explain what that was. Wow. Next to him was a cauldron and a multitude of bodies. The guy says he will explain everything. This was the process of the first refinement. They'd extract the blood and ki from mortals to create the first part of the origin formation. Then they deliver the so-called origin, which is this pot with concentrated power, to the superiors. They take this to some other place where they complete the process by mixing this origin blood with the fifth refinement. When the alchemy is performed on thousands of mortals, the rejuvenation pill is finally completed. And if the boy wants it badly enough, he can even hand over this part of the origin blood that he just finished. It was just the first stage, but it was worth many lives. Sue, however, just thanks and says that now he has no reason to hesitate in killing anyone there. But suddenly, a halberd comes in his direction and Seo ends up letting the guy go. In this, he turns around asking what the squad leader is doing there, but the guy tells him to be silent. My god, it's the rest of those people, the shadow friends who worked with him before. And the man tells him to be silent, saying he doesn't talk to traitors. An explosion happens in the house and Seo asks, "Are you calling me a traitor, squad leader? Do you even know what the Imperial family has been doing?" The chief advances, saying he knows, and orders a strike, but Seo manages to dodge. In that moment, he asks, "If you know, how do you have the courage to swear loyalty to them? What kind of human would do something like that?" The man continues attacking, saying, "We are the arms and legs of the Emperor. We don't think for ourselves, we simply move according to his will." Seo replies that the man is an idiot. To the Emperor, they were nothing more than common people and were nothing but cattle. But then the chief kicks him in the stomach and pushes him away. Seo realizes, this bastard's skills have improved even more. He was about to reach the peak of the three flowers. And then the chief asks, "Do you think your side is different? Tell me, what is the big difference with this Jin clan you joined?" Seo is about to say something, but the man interrupts, saying no, they are also ascetics. They also see common people as insects. The scale of importance they give to humans is exactly the same, even if the methods are different. In the end, they would also grind the Empire's citizens to get what they wanted. And maybe they would even prove to be worse than those currently in power. Wow, but then I have to disagree. How could they be worse than someone who kills everyone, thousands of citizens, just to throw them into a cauldron and make pills? And at that moment, Seo sees a sequence of red lines coming towards him and realizes he won't be able to block. However, in the middle of the man's body, he now sees a strange purple color. What was that glow? The chief then says it doesn't matter if the side is better or worse. He will choose to remain loyal to the side he belongs to. He then attacks with the halberd while Seo prepares. He sees the strengthening ki and knows this man wants to end it with the next attack. Seeing that this is the man's conviction, he uses the technique of the mountain cut of the echoing veil. The energy expands, cutting through the entire battlefield, and the old man is frightened. Seo stands still, saying he will honor this determination of his opponent. Unfortunately, however, he only has one technique that can block this strengthened ki. The problem is that he can't control the power well. He said he can't control it, but he destroyed the old man's arm, who suddenly starts praising, saying, "No matter how many times I see your swordsmanship, Seo, it remains incredible." Suddenly, he gave a compliment. And our protagonist approaches, saying, "My technique is far from refined. I'm just an ordinary person." The old man, however, falls to the ground. The man wants to praise, and Seo will have to accept it. Far from being refined, Seo, that technique you use is amazing. It's about to reach the awakening of the three flowers. It was the most wonderful form I've ever seen. My whole life, I've been seeking martial awakening to reach the level of the three flowers. However, when I finally saw the peak, I realized it was nothing more than a low level for any ascetic. That's when I realized that what I've been practicing my whole life would never come close to the cultivators. I learned that I was devoted my entire life for nothing. So I kept searching for a path to justify it until now. The old man falls to the ground, saying it's just a pity they carry different destinies. Wow, not even girlfriends praise as much as this old man. It's a shame he's been on the wrong side his whole life and won't change now in his last moments. Or maybe not. We have to see what the Jin family's objective is. Seo is silent, fixing away, and then says, "Why didn't you interfere in this fight?" Surrounded on all sides, he wants to know. After all, if they had interfered, the squad leader would have survived. He would be the one lying on the ground. One of the men replies, "That was the squad leader's request. Vice leader, he said that if we used everyone, you would use poisoned weapons." And what he wanted was a duel of pure martial strength. Seo finds it strange that they still call him vice leader. And the men put their swords to their chests, saying that once a commander, always a commander. And once they swore loyalty to the majesty, it remains eternal. Seo replies, "It seems you intend to maintain this loyalty to the emperor." He says and apologizes, stating that if that's the case, you will have to kill everyone present. He speaks with an air of superiority in the style of Sung Jin-woo. Meanwhile, in the city, explosions are happening everywhere, men being thrown away, and Young Hoon commanding everyone to advance, warning that they need to destroy the Mekli clan's refining furnace. The team continues to push forward, Talisma receiving a lick on the neck. While in the air, there are some men who seem like wizards, everyone with their magical talismans creating a rain of fire. One of the soldiers is wondering, where the hell are the reinforcements? Where's that idiot from that family? Meanwhile, back with Seo, a blade cuts through and another soldier falls. The protagonist, however, is also getting exhausted. One of the soldiers sees the needle in his armor and knows he will be paralyzed. He then asks, "Seo, why did you choose such a difficult path? In fact, he chose the difficult path because he didn't kill anyone and paralyzed everyone. And the man wants to know, you could have killed everyone here without getting hurt. So why did you prefer to immobilize us and end up getting hurt? Sue replies, because you still call me vice leader. The man is surprised and then falls face first to the ground, saying that until the end he was an interesting man. What he wants to know is if he finally managed to reach the 3 flowers. Sue puts away his sword, saying that, unfortunately, he hasn't reached that level yet. He is just beginning to understand how this works. The truth is he saw the 3rd color, a strange purple line, but he can only see it inconsistently. Perhaps he needs another long life of fighting and dying. At that moment, a man on the roof shouts, saying, "Incredible, your skills have reached this level. That's why my father sent me." Sue recognizes him as Prince Maklihan. He says it's been a while since they last saw each other crowned prince. If you've been watching from the beginning, why didn't you interfere? The man laughs, saying, if I had interfered, it would have been less fun. Besides, don't call me crown prince here. Today, I am just a representative of the Makli clan's reinforcements. Confused, the elder says, Prince, do you think watching your guards die is fun? However, Maklihan gets irritated, saying, I already told you not to call me prince, but since you insist, let me tell you something. Do you know how I became the crown prince? Then Sue is startled. The man's aura begins to spread. Wow, a great cultivator, as he occupies the entire panel. And he says he reached the refining stage at a young age, just like his father. No matter how significant Sio's growth is, at most he could face someone at the 3rd stage. So how could someone who would have been defeated by him when he was young defeat him now? Moreover, it was funny for him to think he needs a guard. Sue realizes this man is strong. Even martial masters who have mastered the 3 flowers would have to risk their lives to fight against this monster. The problem is that I haven't even reached that level yet. If I fight him, I'm sure I will die. But why does a smile form on my face? The reason is obvious. It's because I am not afraid of death. If it means getting closer to understanding these lines, how important is death? If one can awaken at dawn, then there's no problem dying at dusk. That's what that man taught him while fighting against 50 people. In my past life, I never understood this teaching. But now I am finally starting to comprehend. The prince just laughs and says, I can't believe you're advancing with the certainty of death. Vice leader of the squad, you're more of an idiot than I imagined. The protagonist, however, jumps, knowing that now he will understand the difference between martial prowess and a cultivator. He launches a black cut in the direction of the prince, saying that today, he would take martial arts to the limit. From the prince's perspective, he sees Sio jumping, a black mist appearing on the sword, and suddenly he disappears. He is confused, wanting to know where he went. We see that just before, Sio finally understood the writings on how to reach the peak of celestial martial arts. He had memorized everything, but until today, he could barely comprehend a single line. He could even perform, but he couldn't understand. Yet at that moment when he saw the strange purple line for a second, he seemed to understand what the exhaustion of martial arts meant. The book said that if a martial exchange is a collision of colors, perhaps the color itself can be attacked. This was one of the phrases that Sue never managed to understand, until finally he got close to comprehending the peak of the 3 flowers, and now everything finally makes sense. The idea behind that color and its meaning, it goes far beyond different martial arts. He seems to be cutting the prince's aura of consciousness, and in that he understands that the meaning of this lies in cutting the very perception that an opponent has of you. The prince remains there wondering, where is he? While now, the protagonist understood why he couldn't find Young Hoon. He vanished like a ghost because he could cut the perception that Sio had of him. This was a martial art that allowed a martial artist to stand face to face with a cultivator. This was the technique that had been created to surpass the heavens. In this, the blade is at the prince's neck, but it seems to have collided with an aura. Makli is confused and wants to know what trick he used, while the protagonist tries to understand why it seemed like he was hitting an armor around the man's body. Suddenly, he is pushed away, exploding on the ground in a movement from the prince, who says that this mediocre trick is fun. But it's over. He was nothing against a true cultivator. A great tornado expands in front of Sio, who knows he has to dodge. Coming out from within it, other blades of wind come flying as he retreats, but everything around is being completely torn apart and destroyed. Sio knows he won't be able to get within an inch because those blades of wind are lethal. Not to mention that even if he manages to get close to the body, he has to know how he will get past that strange defense. At least dodging was easy as long as he stayed out of the zone of comprehension. The problem is that cultivators use spiritual energy, so Sio will become exhausted long before he does. He couldn't take much longer. He had to end this as quickly as possible. He needed to evolve to the peak of the 3 flowers here and now. The prince's expression changed to confusion. Seeing Sio, he asks, what do you think you're doing? You look exhausted. Another blade of wind comes flying, but the protagonist activates the mountain cutting technique and slices it in half. The prince is bewildered at how this is possible. Meanwhile, Sio notices that his arm and sword are hurting a lot, but it would be impossible for him to fight while retreating now. In this, another dozen blades come and he activated the greatest technique I have ever seen in my life, or it was a sequence. It was the landscape painting of the joy of mountains and peaks flowing to the summit of the rugged cliff stone. This is no longer a technique, it is literally an entire poem in the midst of battle. And he is there sending one attack after another, saying that he cannot stop. No matter what, his body will end up destroyed like a rag. Mekli, however, remains there like Naruto, sending various jutsus, wanting to know how he has the courage to act like this. Suddenly, a giant mouth emerges amidst the tornado, and the man orders him to die now. Sudo at that moment is sure he won't be able to dodge this. His instincts were telling him he would die instantly the moment it touched him. However, at that moment, that didn't worry him at all. He would unconsciously follow the path of the purple line while wondering what purple means. Blue is the line of protection, it originates from him. Red is the line of will, which originates from the enemy's attack. In this, he begins to realize perhaps the purple was both protection and attack, the hatred and the intention to intervene against him. The monster comes forward, now he understands. He always imagined that the opponent saw red, however, from the opponent's perspective, everything is obviously inverted. What is blue to him is red to the enemy, and what is red to him is blue to the enemy. It all came down to a matter of perspective. In the end, all lines had the same color. A martial art cannot be complete by itself. It needs its enemy to make any sense. A level at which he can comprehend a reflection of himself and his opponent. Now he was understanding what the peak of the three flowers was about. By understanding how the enemy sees him, he begins to realize he has been wasting ki in a foolish way. The sword gang was a technique he could barely maintain for a second when he put all his ki into it. And now it is explained. A martial art was not performed solely with one's own strength. The perception of the opponent and the world was what truly completed it. And with that, he activates the mountain-destroying technique, the final form. The cut goes towards the desert lizard, straight into its mouth, and smoke rises in all directions. Meanwhile, the guards who had been paralyzed were watching Sio's fight. Everyone knew the outcome of this battle. His resistance was irrelevant. A common man fighting against a cultivator. A martial artist had no chance against an immortal being. However, the guards could not believe what they were seeing. Sio appears with the three flowers of the peak awakened. In this, he begins to breathe deeply and realizes all the energy he had wasted was returning to him. Mekli is trying to understand what he thinks he is doing, however. Sio just tells the Majesty to prepare. The prince executes another bunch of jutsu, telling him to stop getting excited just because he broke a single spell. He wants to see him get through this. Suddenly, 4 more desert dragons appear. However, at that moment, Sio advances. He no longer felt that any of those creatures had the ability to kill him. Now that he reached the level of the three flowers, he realized that the peak of transcendence and the martial cut of the mountain were all part of the same martial art. The dragons continue advancing while he now makes a combination of the mountain transcending the peak. He is literally flying in the aura of the tiger, activating the transcendence of the peak of light towards Mekli, who tries to defend himself. He launches another explosion towards Sio, saying that he is a mere mortal and should stop with these ridiculous tricks, dreaming that he could surpass this cyclone. Sio, almost invisible amidst all that, realized this cultivation technique was the concentration of thousands of spinning blades of wind. However, he manages to see something. He activates 2 more techniques, the destruction of the mountain and the painting of the landscape, and now notices that he can defend against those strange blades. Mekli is standing still, not understanding what he is doing, while Sio approaches with his lightsaber, saying that now he understands why he couldn't get through those defensive techniques. However, the key of the sword was completely different, and he lashes out at Mekli's neck. The cultivator bleeds, tries to cover the wound, and launches another explosion forward, but Sio just reflects and stands still, while Mekli, holding his throat, tells him not to come closer. He launches another explosion, a sequence of blades, and tries to flee. Sio, however, is behind him, warning that he won't let him escape today. And wow, he cut him in half completely, only the upper part falls to the ground. And the cultivator doesn't give up, he turns around confused, wanting to know how a mere mortal was capable of doing something like this. He tells him not to come closer. Stop thinking that what you were doing is right. Do you think the Jin clan is very different? Or you really think that the cultivators of the Jin clan reached the stage they are in without having consumed pills made from mortals? You better remember that my father gave you an empty pill a few years ago. If you consumed it, to this day you are no different. Sio humiliates him. He takes the pill, destroys it, and tells him not to worry. He does not intend to consume anything made by those disgusting cultivators. Mekli is there surprised, saying nothing, and Sio says goodbye. He goes to make the cut, but another blade comes and the cut passes through Sio's head. It was too good, wasn't it? He wonders why his body is upside down. In that moment, he understands, I was decapitated. This is not an attack that someone at the beginning of cultivation could perform. It has to be something that drastically surpasses that. Only an advanced cultivator or young Hoon, who has already reached the peak of the 5 energies, could perform something like this. He begins to have a flashback of all the lives he has lived, from the first to this one. He sees a scene of young Hoon killing a cultivator and celebrating that he finally killed a man at this stage. Finally, a martial artist could stand up to these men. While Sio thinks, a long time ago, our second life ended in an instant. I taught young Hoon and saw him surpass the cultivators. In that, I began to have hope that one day I would defeat the cultivators. However, that day soon collapsed. On that day, I couldn't do anything. He repeats to himself that he just needed to be stronger to have tried even harder, and maybe he would have gotten further. However, the head is on the ground while he tells himself that now that he has reached this level, he cannot let himself die like this, without doing anything more. This was not the moment. He needed to kill that man. Friend, you lost your head. I think you won't make it, but I admire your endless motivation. Meanwhile, Mackley is looking at a talisman on his chest, saying that he survived. The item his father had given him, rare and single use that creates an attack from a cultivator at the key construction level. He laughs, saying, "Mortal, I won." However, he is face to face without legs while the protagonist is without a head. Seo wonders if cultivators really win in the end every time. Young-hoon celebrates that he finally killed the first cultivator. However, it doesn't appear in front of him, saying that there are many others and he is nothing but a mere mortal. Confused, Young-hoon does not understand why there were more than 50 of these men in front of him. In fact, no matter how incomparable he was under the heavens and how strong a martial artist he was who even defeated a cultivator, in the realm of these men, there were countless others at the key construction stage. They say there are more cultivators than stars in the sky. The zoom on Seo's hand shows a small movement, while Mackley is saying, "What the hell? I used all my energy." Seo knows that for mortals, this was like an endless wall, a path that cannot be crossed. And at that moment, he almost gave up. He was so overwhelmed by this that he wished he had never learned martial arts, simply to become a soap seller once again. However, he never gave up. He sees a flashback of Young-hoon saying, "I will stop these men, but you have to stay alive." In that, Seo's headless body begins to move slowly, driven by pure determination. Mackley asks how it is possible, how a mere mortal can carry such a pure will. Fallen on the ground, Seo tells Young-hoon that it doesn't make sense for him to be sacrificing himself for him. He shouldn't fight against these men. However, Young-hoon looks back and says he has seen Seo struggling infinitely until now. If he is talking to the Seo he knows, he will inevitably see a better tomorrow. With that, he delivers the final attack on Mackley. Seo Even-yun, who was made of flesh and bone, practiced martial arts his entire life. His hand that lasted decades, holding this sword to the point of destruction. The martial arts he had refined his whole life. The body that performed all of this and carried this obligation stood tall even after Seo's death. In that moment, as he died, Mackley was filled with disbelief and fear. Even decapitated, Seo was smiling. And with that, this life of eternal body refinement came to an end. He sees Young-hoon saying, "That was a good cut. You need to keep going because your effort will never betray you. You need to carry the mindset that it's okay to die at dusk so that you can go further at dawn. That is, never forget. Your efforts will eventually bring you to a new day worthy of the sweat you shed." And that was Seo Even-yun's 5th regression. My god, that was crazy, right? Wow, what a masterpiece, friends. We finished the first season and this one, worthy of a movie, you got it. Very crazy. What am I going to say, right, friends? We ended with a life lesson. I had narrated this work up to 22, the video was ready, but when I went to check, the last chapters came out. I said, "Oh no, now I have to narrate, I'll finish before releasing." And that's it. What am I going to say? More good works are coming. Lately, some absurd ones have been released. So you don't miss the next ones coming up, what are you going to do? You activate it there. Goodbye.